Good morning. We'll start the meeting with the karakia from Councillor Galloway.
Kia hora te marino, kia whakapapa ponamo te moana, he huarahi, mā tātou I te rangi nei, aroha atu, aroha mai, tātou I a tātou katoa. May peace be widespread. May the sea be like greenstone, a pathway for all of us this day. Let us show respect for each other, for one another, bind us all together. Kia ora.
On Monday afternoon, we were all shocked with the devastating news of the volcanic eruption up at Waikari, White Island. Our thoughts are with everyone that's been impacted by this tragic event, and I ask that you stand with me for a moment of silence in respect of all those that lost their lives. Thank you. I have apologies from Catherine Chu for absence and also from the Mayor for partial absence. Is there any other apologies? I do have a mover for Councillor McDonald, seconder, Councillor Temperton. All those in favour? Carried. I haven't been made aware of any declarations. Could we just make sure that if there are any, you make me aware of them before the item begins?
Sorry, Mr. Chair, just for the minutes, put an H in Chu.
Thank you. There's no public forums. We'll move into the deputations. We have 4 deputations this morning. On item 10, I'll just remind the deputations before they begin that the decision of the committee today is around whether we go out for pre-notification engagement with stakeholders, the public, prior to them deciding whether we notify a change to the district plan. So I ask David Lynch to come forward. Welcome, David. You have 10 minutes. That includes time for questions and answers.
I did send through the deputation, so I hope that's been circulated. Good. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and sorry about the short notice of making this request. I'm making this deputation in a personal capacity. As some of you will be aware, I have made a number of deputations in the past, on the 7th of Feb last year, and the 13th of June, regarding concerns we had as a family over the Council's approval of a non-notified proposal on Hagley Avenue. Development now is completed and for the most part appears to be operating as an Airbnb development. I've provided a copy of our deputation from the 13th of June for your perusal. That provides a more detailed background. I appreciate the reason I'm here today, but just, I guess, in summary, as I guess we've previously submitted, would be interested to know that when you now look at the completed development on the corner of Hagley Avenue and Morehouse Ave, as we've previously submitted, be really interested to know if this council actually believes that is the future for the city in terms of responding to residential living. You know, what you've got there is effectively modern bed sits, no parking, in our view, no sense of community. In our opinion, there's no attempt to make these type of developments livable long-term to create a viable, long-term sense of community in this city. And I think it's incumbent upon everybody in this room to probably go and have a look at that unit and satisfy yourselves one way or another whether you agree with our position. The district plan should ensure a high standard of design for all types of residential developments in the suburbs and the CBD. Clearly, there are going to be apartment developments in the suburbs and the CBD, but they should be well designed, perhaps involving the urban design panel and encouraging mixed use to not predominantly monolithic blocks of one look, 1 or 2 bedroom, one type of occupier Airbnb. However, if the City Council wishes to support non-hosted Airbnb, we respectfully submit that it must be on the basis that these type of activities are rated as commercial and not residential. Now, response to the proposed pre-notification engagement. We applaud the Council for the decision to finally recognise and respond to the problems associated with Airbnb and related rental agencies' whole unit non-hosted home share accommodation listings in the suburban residential areas and within the CBD. We support the proposal to amend the district plan rules to address the many issues associated with Airbnb, particularly where an applicant has been granted a residential resource consent, then markets a unit very strongly to investors for non-owner hosted Airbnb. A more proactive enforcement of the current rules could and should be actioned immediately, in my view. We support the approach undertaken for the community engagement. We understand that, and we appreciate the reasons and where you want to take that. However, we question the wisdom of doing so between the 16th of January and the 17th of February for the following reasons. A time frame of just 4 weeks is not sufficient, particularly for residents groups or body corporates to meet and, if necessary, seek professional advice in preparing a formal response, and the proposed community engagement period at a time when people are still on holiday and have other priorities. We would suggest you rethink that, and our recommendation is that you aim for an engagement period of at least 8 weeks, given the significance of this, and maybe consider deferring it until March. Airbnb remit. We understand the City Council is pushing for new legislation so that the council, that councils that choose to can require all short-term accommodation providers, including Airbnb operators, to register with their local council. The purpose of the Airbnb remit is to allow local government the ability to fairly and efficiently regulate guest accommodation providers. This is something that we certainly support, and we would encourage this council that you make further representations to local government to ensure that this is actioned as a matter of some urgency. Here's something I thought you might find interesting in terms of how you assess Airbnb as a council. Having spoken to a broker just as recently as last night, he advised me if someone is operating an Airbnb that is not owner-hosted and they declare this to the insurer company, it is deemed a commercial activity. Short-term letting through Book a Batch, HomeAway, Airbnb, or any rental agency would normally require a commercial policy taken out. In the case of multiple units that are managed through a body corporate, where there is a mix of short and long-term letting, a commercial policy would be required. If the property owner has not declared they are running an Airbnb, non-owner hosted, this is considered a material fact that under the terms of the policy they must disclose, and failure to do so could result with a claim being declined. It would be interesting to know if this council has obtained an opinion from the Insurance Council, New Zealand Insurance Council, that if a property owner is operating an Airbnb in breach of the district plan, would the owner be covered by their insurance company? Finally, I draw your attention to the Jersey City Airbnb report. I have attached a copy of that, and I believe that might help staff in terms of understanding a pragmatic approach to hopefully moving into a situation where we can actually see some fairness and reasonableness from this council in response to the proliferation of Airbnb. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Are there any questions?
Yeah, thank you. I was interested in your thoughts on whether we should be using the regeneration powers to act quickly, given what you've expressed in terms of coming some time ago and now coming back to us today. Do you think this, given what you're seeing in the central city, that this would be a case of using the regeneration powers to get something in place sooner rather than later?
Well, I think if anybody thinks that right now the residential response to the recovery of the city is working, is okay, in my view, you need to take urgent steps to do everything possible, because I don't believe some of these developments were what council planners anticipated. And with the greatest respect to some of these developers, they are just interpreting the rules to ensure they get the maximum outcome on the sites. Now, if that's acceptable to this council, that's fine. Certainly not to me, certainly not acceptable to many other submitters. So to answer your question, absolutely. Haste, urgency is required.
The document that we have in front of us proposes that we go out to the public for a pre-consultation. So it's to get some feedback about the different areas of the city and how they are differently impacted by Airbnb. Do you support the concept of going out for a pre-consultation? I mean, I actually take on board your comments about the length of time that's available for submissions, and I think that we will address that. But do you agree with the concept of going out for a pre-consultation in order to get feedback before staff look at the various options? I mean, you've given the Jersey option, and that's very gratefully received, but you know, Auckland's done something very similar. You know, so we are going to look at all of those options. But do you like the idea of us actually going out for a preliminary conversation first?
Look, I support that level of engagement, but with the greatest respect, the answers are actually there. We know what the challenges are. Just go out and fix them. But having said that, yes, of course, if we have to go through this, if there's still some learnings...
It's not that we have to, and I'm not being argumentative. I'm just suggesting to you that in terms of a process, Airbnb has grown quite dramatically in a relatively short space of time. Our district plan has proved to be inadequate the way it is. In order to go through a Resource Management Act process, which ultimately can end up in front of the Environment Court, don't you think it's a good idea to actually have a conversation with our general public about the different impacts that Airbnb have on different parts of the city? Well,
yeah, I mean, I understand that perspective that you share. I personally feel that there's a lot already known around this council, but you know, I would support that. But let's for Pete's sake, let's make sure it's meaningful engagement. Don't stick people in a hall and have the staff tell the people. Let the people be far more engaged, and as I say, give them time. Yeah. And certainly it does surprise me though that in the report there isn't a lot of evidence that staff have necessarily looked internationally, which is something I know I referred to and others did the last time we were here. But look, that's okay. You're doing it now, and we support that. Or I support that.
Thank you for your time.
Pleasure. Thank you.
I'll ask Mark Jarrett to come forward. Thank you.
Thank you, councillors, for the opportunity. I'd also like to acknowledge the chair for providing guidance to make sure that I was addressing the process, and I'd also please acknowledge, if we pass it on, Nelson McLaughlin, the senior policy planner. I had a number of clarifications who responded promptly and comprehensively, explaining the council's research and some of the conclusions that they were coming to. I was really appreciate with the follow-up email and the phone call. It was excellent. So thank you very much for this deputation. This concerns agenda item number 10, which is the pre-notification engagement on home share accommodation regulatory options. I understand the matter is due to go out for public engagement, and accordingly I'm largely restricting this deputation to a matter of process. I wish to acknowledge the council and staff's recognition of the problem of whole unit unhosted home share accommodation listings in suburban, and I've added and CBD and residential and rural areas. I support this report's focused on the whole unit unhosted home share accommodation. I'm formally requesting the council, Christchurch City Council staff, Christchurch City Council direct staff to undertake engagement, including an opportunity for public comments for a period of 2 months, that's 8 weeks. This is double the time frame recommended by the council staff. In addition, I'm formally request I formally request the council direct the staff to go out to the residents' groups and meetings as opposed to mainly relying on drop-in sessions at Turanga, library service centres, etc. I consider it unreasonable to expect the residents to formally meet, spread the word amongst their networks, organise collectively, individually, and research on planning, particularly emphasis on plans, and respond to public engagements in just 4 weeks. I'd like to remind you, councillors and council staff, that the residents will be mostly working on the engagement responses in their evenings, weekends, as most will have day jobs. I note the professional organisations, associations and body corporates will probably find it more practical to have a reasonable time of 8 weeks to formally meet and respond. The body corporates, I would argue, would have an interest if one of their members operates an unhosted whole unit home share, and it will be interesting to see how the insurance will assess the whole block, whether I'll assess the whole block as commercial or confine it to one apartment, so they'll probably need professional advice. And as you know, a body corporate is a formal organisation. It can't meet quickly and formally. I should note a professional acquaintance of mine who has, through the years, fulfilled, and I quote, through the years, fulfilled his civic responsibility by responding to many numerous CC requests for formal planning submissions, and he considers 8 weeks a minimum to work through. I'm also requesting that the staff go out and visit the residents' community groups at their meetings, as it will encourage the locals to attend. I'm sure you will agree the residents' group have a much more comprehensive communications network than the council. Not that there's anything wrong with the council comms team. The going out to the residents was used, as you recall, most successfully, in my experience, by the council staff after the earthquakes and the CB was cordoned off. I mean, I remember attending at least 2 meetings. It was a full house, and it was a huge turnout as the council staff came out and talked to the residents who were actively engaged. Such an approach shows the council staff as being determined to seek community input, and I consider it also demonstrates respect. In addition, the residents and community groups will be actively involved and motivated to ensure a successful participation. They'll want to make it work. In conclusion, I've just included a study that was done on Jersey City with the key findings below my deputation, which effectively argues from Jersey City that non-whole unit unhosted home share accommodation is dominant and is effectively a commercial operation. And interestingly, they suggested that property management companies are often involved. Anyway, councillors, thank you very much for hearing the deputation.
Thank you, Mark. Is there any questions?
Just about our current district plan, because our current district plan essentially, I mean, I haven't got this exactly right, but it essentially says that if you're outside the 4 avenues, you need a resource consent in order to build the home sharing accommodation or to utilise accommodation for home sharing in this regard. But do you think that that's an effective policy mechanism, because it doesn't really address the problem that you seem to be talking about, which is significantly focused within the CBD?
Well, according to the staff report, the activity is primarily the CBD, and it's been some concern, I think, amongst the residents group, certainly myself, that for some reason, I think Dave Kelly in an article in the press argued that the residents in the suburbs have got more rights than the residential zone areas, the residents of CBD.
Plan, yes,
and in fact, is my understanding, the urban design panel, which the council previously was suggesting be involved, is not involved, which, yes, I think the central city resident defined residential areas should be protected as something special to the city, yes.
Yeah, so the district plan itself, because as you know, I mean, there was the challenge of the district plan process, the replacement district plan process, with many of the restrictions that, the requirements that were previously in place were really dismantled by really directive of central government through the Order in Council. So would you like us to revisit some of those decisions as well? In this process?
Yes. There was, I remember, amongst the council staff, when there was review going on post-quake, there was confidence that the residents groups in their participation, because we should stress to the councillors that the residents in the central city live and breathe operating within the city, because they're running shoulder to shoulder with commercial development and everything else that goes on in the central city. That's part of the reason they're there. I know that now. So the residents were happy to negotiate. I remember the council staff saying that they were impressed. They were complimentary that the council was crying and throwing, and then it went through, and it seems to have changed. The government stance was different from the recommendations coming through from the combined efforts. Yes.
Yeah, so you would like that?
Yes, I think it should be
reviewed.
reviewed.
I think from the previous submission we heard that very strongly in relation to the design panel.
Yes, I think that's important. I also think at the moment, I think it would be safe to say the home share accommodation that's operating is probably predominantly more effective in the central city, and I shall always point out to them that I suspect you will need to review that, because I'm assuming the council wants more owner-occupier, and I'm not detecting those owner-occupier for that mixed accommodation, mixed residential use is not happening. There's less owner-occupier. My other concern is the central city had a number of residents who would deem to be, how do I put them, that would require, I suppose you'd classify them as lower income, etc., and they were a vital part of the character of the central city. Well, they've been priced out of the central city, and it's sad that they've had to move somewhere else. But they were a crucial part of that culture of the CBD.
Yeah, okay, thank you.
Thank you, Mark. I just wanted to comment. I really appreciate the way that you always affirm staff and your interactions with them. I think that's really lovely. Thank you for that.
Well, it's easy to do if they do it.
Well, we don't often hear that, so thank you. But I also, I wanted to, you were thinking about engagement and going out to residents' associations. I mean, you'll be aware that a lot of residents' associations are made of a certain demographic. Any ideas? It's a real challenge to actually get other sectors of the community's voices heard in any issues that we have. Any thoughts about how we could, in this issue, engage with those who are perhaps of a different, younger demographic?
My experience is primarily within CBD and the central city, and as the councils will be aware, there's a large number, Councillor McClellan will be fully aware of that, there's a large number of active central city residents group who network furiously. I'm getting emails on a regular basis on Chester Street, just to community gatherings, etc. So there's already a lot of informal networks, etc. That by going, and effectively what I'm arguing is go in partnership with the residents groups, with the organisations, to go and talk to the community, to get them in a chance for them to go back to the community to co-opt. So you're effectively co-opting them, but it's a challenge for them in some cases in the suburbs, I understand, but it's also a chance for them to go out there. I think a number of people will be interested.
Thank you. So it's about using the networks that are already existing and strengthening those.
They are, as any council will tell you, you're stunned at how good the Christchurch informal network is. It's a major influence in the city.
Right, we've got time for one last question from Jake.
My question follows on from Anne's, which is that, given there are a large number of very active, well-organised community groups in the CBD, is it your view that, and it may not be, that actually council could afford to scale back some of those drop-in sessions because we'd actually be going out and talking to the people that have a natural interest in this area anyway? Or would you like to see both?
I'd like to see both. I believe in full coverage as opposed to emphasis on one. And the other one for the drop-in centres, I'm mindful of the fact that part of the plan or the vision of the city was there would be a lot of multi-storey apartment living within the CBD. And that really hasn't happened. I mean, there's lots of debate about the size of balconies with the apartments, and that area hasn't happened within the CBD. This is outside the residential, central city residents. And I think it's important some of the drop-in centres, if the developers are interested to see what's proposed and what's there, they would have an interest. So a drop-in centre for the professionals and related professions advising them so they could talk to council staff directly would probably be appropriate as well. They probably would be interested.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Can I ask Bob Pringle from Accommodation Sector Hospitality New Zealand Christchurch branch to come forward? Thank you, Bob.
Good morning, I'm Bob Pringle. I'm from Catherine Motels. Peter is talking from the hospitality. And I brought Aaron, who is another motel operator. I'm a motel operator. And I'm going from that point of view. I believe that we should go out to the general public earlier to do this, because I'm concerned that the council here hasn't owned up to their responsibility. We hear Airbnb, we hear Book a Batch. Do you hear Expedia, Booking.com, Orbit Travel, because these are other platforms of people booking through. Airbnb is only one platform. We've heard a lot about the central CBD in the last two speakers, and we agree with them. But we've got 4,000 people, over 4,000 people, putting people in accommodation here in Christchurch. As a commercial operator, what do? I have to have a building warrant of fitness. The council seen fit 2 years ago to increase it 20% to $205 a year. With that, I have to have compliance. We have to have fire alarms. It doesn't matter if someone's coming into my place or coming and staying for one night, 30 nights, 60 nights or 90 nights. We still have to make them safe. The only way that we can make those people safe, we've just seen White Island. The way that we make those people safe is that we have a building warrant of fitness. We have to have people with compliance. And it's on the councillors' heads here. If we change laws that don't make our people safe in our city. I was a volunteer fireman for 27 years. You always remember the first person, it's like sex, you always remember the first and the last person you see. But I always remember those people that you put out in fires. The fire service have to know who's got shared accommodation, what they're looking for. When they turn up for a fire, it automatically comes up on their screens now, what the accommodation is, who they're looking for. And it makes it a lot easier if you've got backup. So it's very important that we look at that. We also, and this is why we have to get out to the whole people to get it, and it's a whole area that we have to look at. It's also like insurance, as the previous people say. You know, if you have a house and run on Airbnb and don't have commercial insurance, you haven't got insurance, it's twice as expensive. You know, rates, we pay anywhere between, 3 and 7 times the amount. When our occupancy drops down to 30%, do we go along, knock on the council and say, hey, we're only 30%, can we just pay residential rates? These are fixed costs we've got. This is affecting our industry. You get in the middle of winter, and women ring you with that they can't pay their rent. They can't pay their rates. And I have it. As a member of the public, people ring me, and I always say to them, go and speak. And we have 4,000 people here, or 3,800 most probably, because most probably 200 are compliant, that aren't paying their way. Why should someone that has gone through the resource consents, done everything right, virtually kicked in the guts because someone next door decides, well, hey, I want Airbnb, and I had a case the other day, a fella come in and said, I come to Christchurch every 2 weeks, I spend a week here. I said, oh, whereabouts do you stay? I stay in Airbnb because it costs me $50 a night for a house. We have to have a similar playing field. And I think it's quite important that we are able to do that and look forward to see that we have a limited... because also we've got another hotels and motels coming on board. We have to look after these people. These are people of our infrastructure. If we don't have this, we'll have a lot of people exit the industry. And we've had people exit the industry in the motels, walked away with nothing. So, I ask you to consider, make it public, so you get all the people, and, just because it's too hard because they think Airbnb, it's not Airbnb, it's commercial accommodation we're talking. They're taking money from people. If I decided to, sell everyone a couple of bottles of beer or a bottle of wine, that's totally illegal. And no motelier does it because we're scared that if we get caught. But we have a next door neighbour, and if we go down Lincoln Road, you can see a Econo Lodge with a notice on the road, Airbnb, right next to his sign. There's a poor fella that's paying rates, paying rent, paying everything. and he's got a fella next door with a wee sign up, Airbnb. So, you know, we have to look across, and, you know, a lot more are going outside the Airbnb. And we hear about, you know, compliance costs and that stuff. You know, it's $205 a year multiplied by 4,000. That's $80,000 that the council's missing out on. That will cover our compliance costs to get everyone up to a standard. You know, a fire doesn't happen on the, you know, 31st night or the 61st night or the 91st night. It can happen the first night. We have to have those people safe in our premises every night. And it's the council's responsibility to look after those people. Erin, do you want to say that?
Just from my point of view, I mean, as far as I'm aware, virtually all of these home share accommodation people are non-compliant in terms of council rules and city plan. I mean, a few years ago, we looked at buying a house down Papanui Road in Merivale, and we're looking at converting it to a motel, going through the full process. It was an absolute no from you guys. Outside the city plan, not happening. So I'm not quite sure why, for us, it's not okay, but for them, it's fine. I mean, in my opinion, we own a motel. Looks like we should unit title every single one. We'll get rubbish taken care of for every single one of those units. We can operate without any, you know, of the compliance costs and things. It just doesn't make sense. Something needs to be done about it. So, yeah, just to make it even, it's not fair.
Thank you, Councillor Jensen.
Thank you for raising these concerns. I just wanted to get a sense of the urgency. Like, I've heard you talk about people going out of business. So, you know, I just wanted to get a kind of sense of, if we just take a business as usual approach to changing the district plan, is that going to be in time to solve the issues that you're talking about?
Well,
should we
you'll see that my notes have been distributed to everyone.
Yeah.
There's graphs and that on the accommodation in Christchurch. We've distributed it. I've just talked about various points of that, and there's graphs on that. And it's having a really detrimental effect in Christchurch.
And I think I read something the other day that home share accommodation in Christchurch used to, 2 years ago, I think, accounted for something like 2 or 3% of the entire accommodation, commercial accommodation sector. In 2 years, it's grown to accounting for 27%. So from our perspective, it needs to happen really fast.
So leaving it to a normal district plan process, which could take up to 5 years, probably isn't going to solve the issue.
Well, we have to have people safe in rooms. That's the first one. You know, it's a council's responsibility. As councillors, it's like a director of a company. You know, years ago, you bet you could do anything. Now it's responsibility of councillors to make sure that people in accommodation are safe.
Thank you for the submission. Thank you both. Bob, it was actually a really powerful deputation, so I really appreciate you taking the time. Would you prefer, or would you see greater sense in a consistent centralised approach with the regulatory framework around this, or do you think it would be a better approach for local authorities to tackle it on a case-by-case basis?
It's hard to get a consensus. You know, Queenstown has taken a different tack on this, but I think, you know, we have, naturally would be the one to do if we could do it and trying to get everyone, but trying to get everyone agreement, and, you know, there's a lot of people and a lot of industries that are associated have Airbnb. You know, we haven't gone into taxes or anything like that, and how, you know, we have to run legitimate businesses, and I can see if we could take a national approach in New Zealand, like, you know, Japan virtually stamped Airbnb out because they thought, well, hey, we can't have it in Japan, and Airbnb has only just started to come back into Japan now because they've, you know, they thought it was unfair on their commercial accommodation that are paying the fee. So, yeah, if we can go the Japanese model, and I'm not suggesting we do that, but, you know, we have to have these people paying their fair share like the rest of us are. And it's how the council look, and it's the, you know, do we have a house in a street and all of a sudden 3 doors down there's an Airbnb running, and, you know, I've come back from Aussie in the middle of the night and we've dropped people off in suburbs and there's no lights, no nothing, and I say to the one night I come back with those shuttle drivers, and I said, well, we don't know. You know, I just let him out here. He says, Airbnb's just like Uber taxis does.
Thank you for your time. The last deputation is from Peter Morrison, Hospitality New Zealand, Canterbury Branch President.
Yeah, good morning, councillors. Bob's done a very good deputation, but I'm really speaking on behalf of our whole board and also more on the hotel side. As you know, we've got a lot of hotel properties in this city. And this is Amy McLennan-Minty, our New Zealand operations manager for Hospitality New Zealand. We are aware today that today's meeting is for this committee to decide on whether or not you embark on a pre-notification engagement with the public on the range of home share accommodation regulatory options available to council. We do support the suggestion from staff that the council do engage with the public further, but providing the report gives a true and accurate perception of the different regulatory parameters for peer-to-peer accommodation versus the commercial accommodation. We say this because the public comments on share economy versus traditional accommodation always mention the price differential, and in particular that peer-to-peer is considered to be cheaper. However, the public fail to appreciate that some of the reasons share economy accommodation can be priced lower is that they are not saddled with the same cost burdens that traditional accommodation providers are. The travelling public is generally in favour of a share economy accommodation, especially the younger generation. However, people who live in areas with high numbers of these properties often take issue with a high turnover of guests and associated negative effects in residential areas, such as excessive noise, reduced parking and security concerns. The general public have a lack of understanding that many peer-to-peer accommodation providers do not have to comply with, such as Goods and Services Tax 1985, the Income Tax Act 2007, the Resource Management Act 1991, local district plans, long-term plans and annual plans, the Health and Safety at Work Act 2014, the Health Act, the Building Act of 2004, and the list goes on. In regards to the Health and Safety at Work Act 2015, we as an industry body point out to our accommodation members that they must meet the stringent fire and safety regulations, as Bob has talked about, while it seems very doubtful that the majority of peer-to-peer accommodation providers comply. The September 2017 fire here in Christchurch is a good example of an Airbnb that didn't have smoke alarms installed, and as a result there could have been fatalities and the international spotlight would again be on us for the wrong reasons, the city. The general public fail to understand that many peer-to-peer accommodation providers do not have to pay commercial rates. And two, the general public fail to understand that many peer-to-peer accommodation providers, particularly in the residential area, must apply for a resource consent as per the district plan and this is not being monitored or enforced. The Canterbury branch of Hospitality New Zealand is very aware that peer-to-peer accommodation is here to stay. We have no issue with the odd family renting out a room, as that is part of Kiwi hospitality. We do, however, have an issue with full-time Airbnb operators engaging in the professional accommodation provision. Disruptors like Airbnb are no different to online travel agencies that Bob was referring to, the OTAs, Uber Eats, Uber or Lime scooters. Our advice to members of our industry, if you can't beat them, join them. Peer-to-peer accommodation is no different. However, if you're going to act like a business, then you must be treated like one. So that is my very small submission. I think you understand where we're coming from.
Thanks so much for that. One thing that's really clear is we've got sort of two separate issues. We've got the fact that we do have some rules in place, but they're currently not being adhered to. And that's mostly because we can't identify where a lot of these Airbnbs are through the current systems, and that one needs legislation. Is that going to solve your problems so that would still allow whole house Airbnbs potentially in areas if they got resource consent, if we could find them? Or are you okay, or would you like them gone, if you like? So are they okay to be there as long as the playing field is level, or would you like us to say no whole house stuff in residential areas because they're not likely to get consent?
What we're saying is that there should be a level playing field.
Yeah.
If they want to, I'm quite happy.
But just make sure it's got the fire
But
alarms
it's got
and
the
all of
fire,
those
and
other,
it pays
run it like a
commercial
business.
rates, and it pays GST, and it pays tax. I know you're not in charge of that side of it, and that's where the government should be enforcing this.
Yeah.
But it's got to be a level playing field.
Yeah.
And especially, I mean, at the moment, we spoke about this way back in March.
It's right. Yeah.
No, you were at the meeting, and it's not, I know it's been very trouble with getting government to make a national rule, but I offered at that meeting that we would get all the Airbnb operators. We can find them, and give them to you so they should be enforced.
Yeah. So at the moment, we've got some rules which can't be enforced. Are you and Hospitalities and the association actually actively lobbying government to get the rules in place and changed so that we can do our part of that?
Yeah, and we did that, and I spoke to some of your councillors that went to the local government this year, and they put forward the
but are you directly
very much
talking
so.
to ministers and all of that kind of stuff?
Definitely, yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Well, thank you very much for your service in the fire service. It's very much appreciated. With regards to the two previous speakers, if we looked at it the other way around, and I think one of the speakers mentioned about that they could go out and get each of their units and property title them and then become Airbnb and skip the whole list of requirements with regards to council requirements and safety, etc., which is absolute paramount. I mean, what would the effect be? Because it seems that those that are working in the industry and are conscious of their responsibilities are being hamstruck by, in a sense, what we're allowing to happen at the moment.
Yeah, and that is, I go back to this level playing field. And if people wanted to do that, you can imagine, it only take one fire, like there was in 2017, that didn't happen. The council have more work to do because you'll be picking up separate rubbish bins instead of one big one. And it's just, all I can say is it's got to be a level playing field. Yeah. We've got 4 more hotels that are meant to be coming in with the convention centre. I wouldn't be recommending them to come in at the moment when there's $50 million of money going to Airbnb operators. $50 million in 1 year.
And a second quick question. With regards, I mean, you guys do a lot of advertising, obviously. What are your thoughts with, and we do have a very good communications team, but what are your thoughts with regards to the consultation going out in January, February?
Well, personally, and I've said this to the Mayor and other people, that we vote the councillors to make the decisions. And it's all very PC to have these meetings with the community all the time. I'd rather, this is my personal opinion, not the Hospitality Association's opinion, that you make a decision and get on with it. But knowing what happens, I agree with David that that in January is probably the 16th of January. I think it could start at the end of January when most people are back at work. Yeah. But I don't agree that it has to go for 8 weeks. If it's advertised properly, that the consultation is going, the sooner this is fixed, the better.
Yep.
So the longer it goes on, and as Yanni said, if it goes to resource, it could be 5 years. This is ridiculous. Yeah. We've known the problem now for 2 years. We met in March with you people, or the committee, and nothing has really happened except more reports.
Yeah.
It's urgent.
Thank you, Cheers. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
And do you want something?
No, it's fine.
Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.
So there's no petitions. We're going to change the order a bit and move straight on to item 10, which is the pre-notification engagement on home share accommodation regulatory options. I will have staff to do a presentation. Mark and Alison.
My name is Mark Stevenson. I'm a team leader in the city planning team. I'm joined by Alison McLaughlin, who's the lead for this plan change. We'll begin by talking through some slides as an overview, and then we'll take questions.
So just as a quick overview of the report, the decision for the committee today is whether or not to proceed with seeking public comment on a range of options for managing home share accommodation in the district plan. Staff recommendation at this time is to proceed with that engagement. Just by way of background, there's been significant growth in home share accommodation in the past 3 years. The most popular areas are around the central city, settlements on Banks Peninsula, other coastal areas, and areas near the airport. Just in the last year, we're aware that on the 2 largest websites, and acknowledging that there's also a number of other websites that we don't have the statistics for, there's been approximately 4,230 listings. About half of those were whole unit, and half of them were private room or shared room. And then within those whole unit listings, about a third were available for 30 days a year, up to 30 days a year. A third were available from 30 to 90 days, and a third were available for more than 90 days a year. So that gives sort of a rough indication of the number of units that potentially have may or may not have a permanent resident on the site. So there's obviously a range of impacts from this growth of home share accommodation. On the one hand, it offers more choice for visitors in terms of the location and the type of accommodation they can stay in. There's an opportunity for homeowners to earn some additional income. It's another use for people's existing houses, and potentially it spreads some tourist spending to parts of the city that wouldn't ordinarily see that spending. But on the other hand, it can have amenity impacts on the neighbors, including noise, parking impacts, antisocial behavior. There can be some weakened community ties, especially in neighborhoods that are seeing a high density of these listings compared to the permanent population. Potentially there can be some increases in house prices and rents if a neighborhood's really popular for home share accommodation and also for residents. And there's also some risk that some spending that would be going into the central city might be going to other centers instead. So in terms of the current rules, guest accommodation is permitted in commercial and mixed-use zones and some specific sites and residential zones. Hosted accommodation is permitted for up to 6 guests. In most residential zones is a bed and breakfast. And in the residential central city zone, units up to 40 square meters can be listed as long as they don't employ anybody that doesn't live on the site. But a resource consent is required for whole units in residential zones outside the central city, and in rural zones if it's not part of a farm stay or a rural tourism activity. So there's 5 options that we wanted to get feedback on from the public. So the first option is keep the rules that we have at the moment. The second option is to limit the number of days for whole unit listings. And this is the approach that's been taken by a number of cities overseas, usually in combination with a registration requirement. So as the council will be aware, the council sent a remit to LGNZ earlier this year, asking them to advocate for some sort of central government action on a registration ability. We know that LGNZ has put together a working group that's gone around and had workshops with a number of councils across New Zealand, and they're preparing a paper with recommended policy options, but we don't know at this time when that's going to be submitted to the central government or what action is going to be taken in response to that. The third option is a range of area-based restrictions. So restrictions could be focused on the areas that are most popular, potentially having the most effects. Alternatively, there could be an attempt to sort of focus it into the areas where it's most popular to sort of contain those effects and also support central city spending. Or alternatively, it could be permitted in areas where there's a demand that's not being otherwise met. The fourth option is allowing home share accommodation in units that meet specific criteria, which would be sort of around trying to avoid the amenity impacts on the neighbors by requiring sort of more separation for the units that can be listed. And the last option is to treat whole units as a type of residential activity, which would essentially permit it throughout residential zones. So just to sum up, the decision, again, is to go out for further comments on these options. We don't really have any certainty at this point about what's going to happen in terms of registration system, or if there's going to be some other legislation to address some of the issues. And again, in terms of the district plan, it's really managing just the environmental effects of home share accommodation. There's a it sort of sits within a range of other responses that the council could have, but just in terms of the district plan, we can't consider trade competition effects. We can only look at the environmental effects that we can document from the activity. But the council has a range of other options that it could consider once the district plan rules are in place that could also manage some of the other effects that have been highlighted by some of the deputations today. And just in terms of the engagement, we're happy to arrange meetings with everyone. Certainly not the intention with listing the drop-in sessions wasn't to say that's the only engagement that we're going to be doing, so we're certainly welcome to set up meetings by request with anybody who requests them. I think we certainly understand the challenges for people trying to put these submissions together in a short time period, and especially coming out of the Christmas holidays. So I think we could consider an additional 2 weeks for that engagement period. Thank you.
Sarah, then Tim.
Thanks so much for that. I mean, I like the idea of going out, exploring the options and those kind of things at this point. Once we come up with something, is actually enforcing it completely dependent on the government changing the rules so we actually can identify them anyway? So whatever we decide, we need to be able to identify them in some way, and we currently can't.
It's not entirely dependent. We do have ways that we could identify individual sites, but it's very...
It's about a day per site.
It's very labor
really
intensive.
Expensive.
Yeah, and there's a large number of sites as well.
Yeah.
So there's a question of fairness in terms of whether or not we would be enforcing it with every site. So the council would need to consider the cost implications of that additional level of enforcement.
Okay, and do we have any indication at all of what the government might do?
We don't at this time. I just know that the recommendations are being prepared from LGNZ, but we don't know what the response to that is going to be, or
Thanks.
what the timing would be.
Tim.
Thank you. Just a couple of 3 questions. With the graph you've given with the numbers, do we know how the growth has happened over the last few years from the concept of Airbnb and the home share really taking off in Christchurch? Because I mean that is, I think, part of one of the pains for the registered accommodation providers. So do we know, because is that going to be exponential as it goes forward? Is there any work on that? Because obviously it's hurting the associations and the registered owners now, but what is the pain in the future? So it's not getting better, is it, for them?
We've done a little bit of analysis around it, which suggests that there's unlikely to be really significant growth going forward. That it's probably slowing down in terms of the level of growth, but obviously, it's difficult to predict into the future. But definitely, you can see that the rate of growth has slowed in the last 6 months or a year.
With regards to the district plan...
Jump in for 1 second. Could I just ask the presenters just to speak a little bit more clearly into the microphone? Some of the councillors are struggling to hear.
Sorry.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. One of the aspects that hasn't really been covered is the safety aspect, which Bob brought in, and it's certainly something that hadn't kind of run past my mind. I've been too busy looking at the numbers, etc. But it is obviously crucial if we've got a large development somewhere, and one was mentioned in the papers from David with regards to Morehouse Ave, if the fire service do turn up. So if we have blocks of flats, does our district plan require, or can we change it to require the home share Airbnb to have that equipment?
So a number of the health and safety regulations are managed through the Building Act or through the fire safety regulations, which are sitting at the national level. So we'd have limited ability through the district plan to change those. But I think as part of central government's consideration of how to approach Airbnbs, they might be looking at some of those other regulations, but to some extent, how they're managed through those regulations is beyond the council's ability.
I guess my question is, could we put up a plan change for that? Because when I've had flats, etc., and some have been in body corporate, some have been individual, but the ones in body corporates, apart from having smoke alarms, there's no connection. So in a block of 10 or 12 flats, you could have, I could have had 4 Airbnbs, which, it's, whereas if I was a commercial operation with 12 or 8 units, they would all have had to be linked to the fire service.
Those matters of safety are outside the scope of what can be considered by the council under the Resource Management Act, so would be unable to propose a plan change to that effect.
Okay, thank you.
Andrew.
Thank you. And my question probably really follows on from Tim's. I'm keen to drill down into the scope of the discussion document in particular. We've heard from a number of submitters this morning considerations around what you might call level playing field concerns. So rating, building compliance issues, warrants of fitness, those sort of things. The discussion paper really is limited to city planning provisions and noise effects, parking effects, environmental effects, and so on. The question from Tim and the answer to it suggests that there are a number of those issues that we might like to engage on. The rating issue, residential versus commercial, the warrant of fitness type issues, that we might want to engage on. Are you saying that those things are not within the scope of what council can do? Because I would have expected that if we had a plan change that meant we were looking at Airbnb as a regulated activity that required a resource consent, and we thought of it as a commercial activity, then there will be other things that would flow on from that in terms of rating and other regulations. Should we not be engaging on all of those things as well, so that we get a clear view from the people as to what their view of how we should deal with those things are as well?
I think there are other methods that the council could use, including rates, in order to address some of those issues. But a number of those are also quite dependent on having a registration system in order to identify the properties. So the sort of decision isn't foreclosing other actions that the council could be taking. It's really just looking at the district plan as a first step, because we could go through this process to identify what the most appropriate rules are, and then off the basis of that, consider what other methods would be appropriate in terms of addressing some of the issues that were highlighted by the deputation.
So would it then be useful in the discussion paper to be posing some questions as part of the engagement? Do you believe that whole home Airbnb should be treated as a commercial activity? Do you believe that residential units used in this way should be treated with the same regulations that would pertain to commercial units? Do you believe there are other matters we could consider? My thought, having heard what I've just heard, is we probably should broaden the engagement document, do this once, do it well, and then let that inform all of our next stage discussion, which is inevitably, I think, going to involve matters of rating and warrant of fitness compliance.
We can certainly add some additional questions around people's understanding of what would be a commercial, what type of activity would have a commercial character versus what is still primarily a residential character, because I think that's a central question for the district plan provisions as well.
Yep.
And we can
what I wouldn't want was to get to considering the engagement feedback and then be in a situation where there are things that we want to discuss that we can't because they didn't form part of the engagement.
Or we need to go out again. Or
yep.
Just to supplement Alison's answer, any change in terms of rating will obviously be subject to a separate process for the annual plan and long-term plan process as well, at which time there will also be an opportunity for people to comment on the appropriateness of
but
a
a result
policy.
of the engagement could be that we pick something up that we then refer into the annual plan process that was triggered by the engagement.
And certainly comments that are received that aren't not on the plan change, we can obviously confer with colleagues in other units. Some aspects, such as compliance with fire regulations and safety, there's well prescribed requirements. So we just need to ask questions that are going to be perceived as adding value. Some matters that people may feel that they can make feedback on, we don't have an option on because of the prescription in regulations around fire requirements and where fire requirements are triggered.
So we could presumably, though, be asking for comment outside of the options that are presented?
We can certainly ask questions, but we just need to frame those questions carefully.
Thank you. So I guess leading to a question for the Chair, if we were wanting to, I mean, my view would be that we need to amend this to broaden the scope of the engagement to the matters that I've mentioned, and there may well be a view around the table. Certainly I've got a view that we need to increase the length of the consultation period, or maybe change the timing as well. So if I can just flag that as something that we might want to pick up in any resolutions.
Yeah, in the third resolution, there's an opportunity to provide further comment.
Yep.
So we can do that through there, but we may need to put additional information on there, including a few elected members just to sign off that additional comment. Jimmy.
Regarding to the community the engagement, based on the previous deputation, there are particular concern the time frame and also consider the time period. I just want to know, all the comments from this community engagement will be comments from the 16th January to 17th February, that's 4 weeks. Whether we just consider, to fit in our annual plan, long-term plan, this time period, so 4 weeks. Otherwise, whether it's possible to extension to 6 weeks or 8 weeks or not, or we can change a different time period. Consultation.
At this stage in the process, there's not a prescribed time period that is specified in the Resource Management Act or that guides us. Through ensuring that people are well informed and providing the opportunities for people to express their views, we felt that 4 weeks would be sufficient. But having said that, as Alison outlined, we are proposing that's now extended to 6 weeks. We think, given the nature of this time of year, it's important we also, given the diverse range of users and groups that are affected by this change, that we should bear in mind that over the summer period, we're also potentially attracting interest on this matter from those that are occupying Airbnb, who may not otherwise be here during the summer, outside the summer period. So I think there's some value of doing it now. We're not, certainly we're supportive of extending it by 2 weeks, which would take it into March.
We've already made that change up in the recommendation. Yanni?
Thank you. I was just wondering if you could tell us, once the discussion documents process is finished, before we see any concrete district plan in place, if that's the approach we adopt, when that would be likely to come in?
So once we have all the comments, we'll consider them. We'll do a summary and then come back to the council as soon as possible in order to make a recommendation on what the preferred plan change would be. Obviously, it depends on how many comments we get. I think we were sort of tentatively hoping to get to the hearing within this year, but then it depends on whether or not, or a decision by the end of the year, by 2020. But it would depend on whether there's appeals and the time period that it takes to resolve those appeals. And so there's still a bit of uncertainty there, but we obviously recognize that it's an urgent issue for a number of people, and we would be trying to resolve it as quickly as we can.
Right. So best case scenario, how soon could we get something in place to help address this problem?
I mean,
2 years? Or?
We'd be aiming to have a decision by the end of 2020. But if there's appeals, it could take more time.
So can you just explain to me why we haven't used the regeneration Christchurch approach, given that what we've heard from the some of the deputations this morning, and also what we've previously heard as councillors from, actually, ironically, some of the same deputations, you know, throughout the last few years. Why can we not use the Regenerate Christchurch process?
So in order to use the Regenerate Christchurch Act, we would need to show that what we were proposing achieves the purpose of that act, which is the recovery and regeneration of the city. And I think with home share accommodations, it's a really complex issue in terms of the effects that it's having. So if, for example, and we don't know what the proposed option would be that we would be going forward with, but if the option was around restricting home share accommodation to protect amenity effects, if that had the effect of discouraging investment, then you could make the argument that it's actually working against regeneration. So it's a really complex issue in terms of its relationship to regeneration and recovery, and I think for that reason it's not necessarily a good fit.
I look at the graphs that we've had through the deputations, and I see that it's like this huge wave of change that's coming at the same time where we've known now that getting hotels back, particularly to support the convention centre, for example, has been critical. So I guess I'm sort of struggling to understand why we don't think that it's urgent to use the Regenerate Christchurch powers.
No, the question's been asked and answered, and it's also in the body of the report about the Regeneration Act.
Well, it's like one sentence.
Do you have a different question?
Right. So just so I'm clear though, if we wanted to ask Regenerate Christchurch to look at this, we could do that. There's nothing that stops us from doing that. If we wanted it to be addressed with urgency, would that be a quicker process than going through our normal district plan?
I think that this report's about proceeding with pre-notification engagement. We will have to come back at a future date with a report on proceeding to notification of a plan change or to use the Greater Christchurch Regeneration Act. And so we would, regardless of whether we use the GCRA or the RMA, would be going through this first path of pre-notification engagement. As Alison described, there's tests in the GCRA, and I think in order for the committee to make a decision about use of the GCRA, I think it would be beneficial if the committee had more information on that. I would though take advise a caution. Under the Greater Christchurch Regeneration Act, Section 71 does enable an expedited process. Given a contentious issue like this, where there are a range of views that may be expressed, under the GCRA there's no hearing, and ultimately the minister can either accept or decline the proposal. There's not a ability to seek amendments to a proposal. It's either black or white. So having regard to the absence of a hearing and the range of views, there may be some concern from the community, at least, of not being able to verbally present views at a later date that would be available under a plan change process. Having said that, we can provide more information on at a future date.
I think just a final point of clarification out of that response, and thank you, that makes sense. We're going to go out and do the discussion, and then based on that, we can choose what the best process is based on the feedback. Could we have a question that asks people about the urgency and how important this is to the regeneration of the city?
Yeah, we could definitely add a question in terms of the urgency. There's some questions around the significance of the various issues, but there's not one specifically around how urgently it needs to be addressed.
Yeah,
so
thank you.
Thanks, Johnny. Aaron?
Yeah, so mine's based on the submitters we had this morning that come and spoke to us and the issues they raised. What we're proposing today, how many of those problems or issues will be solved once we go through all of this process?
What we can provide through the process is more certainty for people around what district plan rules that the community agrees are fit for purpose, and on the basis of that, and a greater understanding in the community, we would be able to. I think there would be, as I said, sort of more certainty for the community about what those rules are. There's, as I said, there's there's sort of limits to what the council can look at in terms of the things like the Building Act and the fire regulations, and registration. But we can at least resolve within the district plan what rules the community thinks are the best.
So, will this process get us there? Are we going to end up with this style of accommodation? I won't call it Airbnb because there's multiple names there, but is that style of accommodation going to be classed as a commercial player, pay a form of commercial rates, they might not be the same, but a form of rates, and have the fire restrictions in place that the others are put under?
So what we would be seeking from the community through their public comments is what, in their view, where that distinction lies between a commercial style or character of home share accommodation and a more residential style, and sort of where that line should be drawn, and on the basis of that.
At the point you pay normally, I would have thought. At the point you pay to stay somewhere would be a commercial definition. Like if I pick up backpackers every night and they just stay at my place for free,
yeah,
not really an issue.
I mean, I think you can have situations where someone lives in the house full time, they go away on holiday for 2 weeks. Over the course of those 2 weeks, they let out their unit on a home share accommodation site. In terms of the environmental effects of that and the neighbours, is probably quite different to somebody who doesn't live there and lets it out 24/7 all year. So I think what we're hoping to get from the community is some sense of where they think that line is, where at what point it starts to have a commercial impact on the neighbourhood and the wider community. And at that point, we would potentially want to require resource consent for it, and then the council could consider if there were other methods that would be appropriate for managing that impact.
Thank you. Tim?
Yeah, thank you. I guess that my questions are more for the consultation team, but you may be able to answer the questions. So just with regards to the timing, following on from the Deputy Mayor's questions, if a body corp, if I understand it right, that is the majority of the dwellings are owned by one organisation, then an annual general meeting, which technically a body corp must meet once every 12 to 15 months. So it's not, I mean, we kind of probably meet more often than most in some of the units we had, but with regards to that, so that the notice for that is 6 weeks for that type, then you've got 3 weeks for an annual general meeting or 2 weeks for a special meeting. So they are legal requirements for a body corporate. So if we're going out for 4 weeks over and starting on this, 17th of January, it does seem kind of be really quite hard to organise that with timing over the Christmas period, etc. And if you're looking at a body corp, because that was mentioned by the previous, that there would be a number of body corps that would be interested in this. Technically, if it's a body corporate that's owned or managed majority of those units, the 6 week requirement's almost missed. So I think, you know, going into the recommendations, Mr. Chairman, I think we do have to get some feedback from our consultation team about the timing of that in the early January or mid-January. Thank you.
Do we have a consultation team to answer questions about the length of the...
So the planning team have worked closely with the consultation team. The matter of whether body corporates can submit isn't necessarily a matter of an AGM meeting, but with a month's consultation, and we've proposed to extend it to 6 weeks consultation, we do hope that that would provide sufficient opportunity for any members of the public, whether body corporates or others, to engage in the process. And staff have heard the points raised in the deputations about being out and about, but ultimately it's a matter for council as part of your decision making. If you want to make it longer or make it shorter or change the dates, then that's to your volition. But staff have heard loud and clear, and we've already proposed to extend it to 6 weeks from 4 weeks.
Thanks, Brendan. Okay, if there's no more questions, we've got a set of recommendations.
So change that last one.
That's fine. So Melanie's moved it. Do we have a You happy with that, Andrew? Just to come through. Yep. Do we have someone to second?
Fine. Yeah, I'm fine. Happy to. Yep. So it's just the two things that were just mentioned were the widening of the scope and also then the time frame, just extending it out by 2 weeks. So that's both covered. So yes. In which case I'm happy to second if it needs to be seconded. No, all good. Either. All good.
Right. Is there any debate? Andrew?
Thank you. I think it's good that we are having this discussion. I mean, the starting point for this is there a problem that we would want to engage with our community on? You know, problem definition is generally a good starting point for any discussion about something that we might want to do. And I think here there is. I mean, Airbnb, peer-to-peer accommodation, realising that this is wider than just Airbnb, that's the brand that tends to be used to describe it, undermines building community in the central city. We've got aspirations about numbers of people living in the central city. The reason for creating residential accommodation is to be building community and having people living there permanently. This type of activity certainly can undermine that, and I think we may be seeing examples of where that's happening. Equally, if we translate this to more traditional communities like Littleton or Akaroa, where there are properties changing hands that have previously been in residential use or have been rented out to tenants under the Residential Tenancies Act, and they then turn over to a new owner or a new use as a peer-to-peer accommodation activity, that not only takes away long-term rental accommodation or owner-occupied accommodation for the community, but it also often has the effect of escalating prices. So in communities like Akaroa in particular, we're seeing this activity starting to reduce both the choice and the affordability of housing which is available for the community. That then has an effect on provision of other services, has an effect on availability of staff for businesses and that kind of thing. So in terms of the problem definition, I think from a planning point of view, certainly there are some issues that we might want to identify and think about how we resolve. And then what were described earlier really as the level playing field issues are also issues I think that we need to turn our minds to. The fairness and parity in rating and also the building warrant of fitness and regulatory matters. So they're all things that, as I mentioned in my line of questions earlier, I'm keen to pick up in this discussion document, and paragraph 3 in front of us certainly allows that to happen. So I certainly support this going out for engagement as a first step in considering how we deal with a number of issues that it raises, certainly realising that this activity isn't going to go away. There is a move away from traditional accommodation provision, but we need to be looking at how the traditional accommodation sector and this method of providing accommodation can continue to exist side by side in a level playing field environment. And my view, reflecting some of Councillor Jani Johansson's comments, are that we need to be getting on with this quickly. The sooner we can get some fairness and quite possibly some regulation and some planning changes around this, the better. So I'm going to be supporting this today. Pleased to see the amendments that have been made to the original resolution as set in the paper, and encourage others to do the same.
Thank you, and I want to thank the submitters. One of the things that didn't even cross my mind was the safety aspect, and I think that's just so obvious. So thank you very much for reminding me of that one. Well, I think when I kind of sat down here and I looked at the resolutions, I was kind of wondering, did we need to know where we wanted to be before we started? And I think the consultation, and I'm very pleased that it's extended to 6 weeks, I think we'll get that, and I do hope there's a simple question for those taking part in it. Do you regard this as a commercial activity, and if so, should it be rated as such? A very simple question, because I think sometimes we ask a question in a roundabout way in a lot of circles. So I think one very simple question amongst others would be a really good way to go forward. I will support this today. I think we've got to move forward. There is an urgency here. We're in a bit of a downturn globally with tourism, etc. So I think that the slowdown is just a blip in the system, and it will ebb and flow as we go forward. So I think it's going to grow. I think it's going to grow exponentially unless we look at the problem and solve it. And I think the consultation that we go through will help us with those in our community telling us where we should go and where we should end up with this. So thank you very much.
I just wanted to briefly say I agree with Andrew's comments that we should extend this consultation to become a whole of issue process and a whole Airbnb consultation as a whole. And I also agree with Yanni's comments that if Hagley Park counts as should count for consideration under Section 71, then there's no reason that supporting a local hotel and motel industry shouldn't be the same. And I think that point has been captured by the extra question that'll be added by staff. And I look forward to considering the best possible process for getting the quickest and most robust plan changes that we can enact, along with the work we'll continue to do working with central government. And staff can expect me to be in contact today or tomorrow about setting up some meetings with those resident groups.
Excellent. On that note, I'll put the motion. All those in favour? Opposed? Carried. Thank you. We'll move to item 9. Programme of plan changes to the district plan. Thank you. But the purpose of obviously this report is to provide an overview of the program plan changes to district plan. I don't think this is the right environment to seek the feedback. So what I'd like to do is obviously get a bit of an overview of this program, but actually then we'll create a separate resolution to have a workshop with councillors early in the new year for us to actually workshop those priorities and proposals to come back to the committee at a later date to actually endorse that work program that we're going to embark on.
In terms of the report, if I can just draw your attention to the attachments to the report, which are as important as the contents of the report itself. The reason for that is particularly for the new councillors, but also as a refresher for existing councillors, we would like to just help you understand the process that we go through for a plan change to the district plan. And one of the attachments, attachment B, provides an overview, a brief overview of that process. The other thing to note is attachment A is really putting in context how the district plan is influenced by a range of documents. We don't work in a vacuum, obviously, and there's direction that we have from a national and a regional level that informs what guides our decision making at a Christchurch city level. And so the explanation of those documents at a national, regional, Greater Christchurch and Christchurch city level will hopefully be a good reference for help understanding of how the district plan's informed. As outlined in the report, we went through a district plan reviews up until 2017, and there was essentially an embargo put on council making plan changes, which got lifted in March this year. So seizing the opportunity, we're now embarking on a program of plan changes, and as the chair noted, we're proposing that in the new year we talk you through those plan changes in more detail and have that discussion about those priorities and other issues that you think may need to be considered in the context of those plan changes, as well as other matters that may require changes.
Thank you, Mark. Yeah, the attachments were actually excellent. It'd be great for the new councillors to, I guess, get to grips with actually the whole district plan change process. We've got a couple of questions from Melanie, then Yanni, and then Pauline.
I was just wondering which, because there's quite a lot of changes listed there, which are like the most, do you think might be the most, I was going to use the word controversial, but the ones that will be of most interest, I guess, to councillors and the general public?
So,
is it answerable?
So there's, in terms of the plan changes, they vary in terms of scale, of significance to the community, but also in terms of geographic extent. What may be perceived as relatively minor, the last one being an example of the transmission corridor through Ferrymead, that may in itself not be significant from a wider community perspective, but is significant obviously at a local level. So in terms of particularly contentious matters or for which there's a range of views, the home share accommodation plan change obviously, the provisions for design requiring a design assessment in residential zones where intensification is provided for. There's been a lot of interest expressed to date, and we expect that to be a significant issue for communities. The coastal hazards plan change, in that respect, there'll be a report at a future date, a briefing at a future date on the process we're working through to inform that, as well as how we're proposing to engage. Sites of ecological significance, that relates to the identification of areas of significance in terms of their vegetation or fauna, and where discussions will be required with property owners. That will be significant for the individual property owners, as obviously to other interests as well. But they're some of the key ones that are likely to attract a lot of interest.
I'd also just add, obviously, it's not a static list as well. So as issues emerge, and they may well be priority issues, and there's certainly a couple that are bubbling away that aren't on the list related to Kaiteriti split. There's a legal process underway at the moment there, and it may also be that we look at a plan change to supplement the Canterbury Multi-Use Arena, subject to council decision tomorrow. So there'll be other ones that get added to the list, and through the monitoring regime that Mark talked about, other things will rise up as well.
Just to supplement what Brendan said, we are that this isn't static, and Kaiteriti split. We are progressing a plan change as a priority to look at Indigenous vegetation clearance rules in the coastal environment, and that is obviously a priority.
Yanni?
Just two questions. One was, we were supposed to have an audit of our resource consent decisions. Where has that got to? Does anyone know?
That's a matter for John Higgins that I cannot answer, I'm afraid.
Yeah, so I just thought, like, if we've got this ongoing audit, then that would hopefully may pick up things to inform where there's gaps in terms of planning. But without doing those audits, it's kind of hard to know. So can we just get some advice back on what's happened to those audits? I think they're supposed to be done by April 2020. And the other question was, I know councils have to review or they have state of environment reporting. Can you just, because of all the changes that we've had, can you just give me over the last sort of 10 years just a snapshot of when we've reviewed the district plan in terms of the state of environment reporting and how that's working?
So under a provision in the RMA, we're required to review every 5 years the extent to which the district plan is achieving what it sets out to achieve. So the district plan defines outcomes of what we want to achieve from an environmental, social, economic and cultural perspective, and we have to monitor the extent to which implementation through resource consents and other application of the rules, the extent to which what's happening on the ground and what is being issued consent is achieving those outcomes. And in that context, the last report was produced prior to the district plan review. So the next report will be due within 5 years of the district plan being made operative. So 2017 was when it was made operative. So the next report under that duty we have will be due to be completed by 2022. We're setting up a number of systems at the moment to be able to monitor resource consents and identify other indicators and targets to understand the extent to which the district plan is achieving what it sets out to achieve. And just related to your first question, which it may have been about, we are reviewing resource consent decisions and looking at the extent to which the decisions are identified, the extent to which through those decisions there's issues identified with the district plan and whether there's a need for amendments to the district plan due to a lack of clarity or misinterpretation due to that absence of clarity in resource consent decisions. So that's part of our duty, which we'll continue reporting on, and the report will be published in 2022. But before that, we will continue the task of monitoring and reporting as appropriate.
An example, very well answered.
An example of that reporting, I should point out, is in your inboxes there will be a brief report that we've prepared on the interface between industrial and residential zones and the complaints arising at that interface, which we've used to establish if there's problems with the district plan.
Thank you. Pauline?
Yeah, one's kind of been answered, except I was going to ask, how you arrived at these. Are they triggered by things like Yanni saying reviewing of the consents, or are they triggered by how did you get to these ones as a priority list?
So we receive notification from a range of stakeholders of issues that are facing in interpretation of the district plan.
Okay.
Both internally and externally. No one's shy.
It's a reactive.
Not limited to reactive. There's issues that the hearings panel didn't address. So, for instance, coastal hazards wasn't a matter subject to the district plan review.
I mean, wouldn't that one be a top priority because that's...
Yeah, that's sort of why we're going to do a workshop.
The workshop, okay.
Yeah.
And the other one is that don't we have to review the district plan every 10 years? And then what you've said here is reviewing the effectiveness of it every 5.
That's right.
So they're kind of different reviews, aren't they?
By undertaking the review, which will complete in 2022, we'll be well prepared to addressing those issues we identified in the next district plan review.
Thank you.
Thank you. Aaron?
Sorry, I just going through that list. I just had I recognised all of them except for one, and it was the high trips. What are high trips? Are they? It's nothing to do with the change in drug legislation coming up.
I wouldn't know what you're talking about.
What I recognise everything else except for that. What is that?
So that's related to transport. So that's the amount of sort of traffic generated by an activity. So we have a rule on the plan that is if it's a large activity that generates a high number of trips, a high number of traffic volumes, then it requires resource consent. And so we're looking at how that works and what changes can be made.
So that rule already exists? And
that rule exists. It doesn't apply entirely to the central city at the moment because of the recovery plan. So that's one of the issues, that whether looking at how developments occur in the central city. But the rest of the city, it does apply, yes.
So hang on, this is a vehicle or a space?
It's an activity that generates a lot of traffic.
Oh, like a supermarket car.
Supermarket.
Right. Cool.
Yep.
Cool. Now I get it. Thank you.
Yep.
Regarding to the one of the bullet point of the paragraph 4.6, those program, the heritage interior one. What kind of program in this one?
So that was something that was also not covered by the panel in the district plan review. So we've got a protection of heritage exteriors. So we've got a list of buildings that are protected throughout the city, and the facades of those buildings are protected, but anything internal is not. So alterations can be made without consent to those buildings, and so it's something we're looking at, whether we should be protecting the internal features of those buildings.
Okay, but I just want to know whether the Yohurst Memorial Hall is part of this one or not.
We
separate.
No, well, we have been having discussions about whether we increase that scope to add additional buildings, and Yohurst is definitely one that has been discussed. So when we have a workshop, we can go into more detail about that one. Yes.
Okay. Okay. Thank you.
So I've got 3 recommendations up there, which is for a workshop in the new year, and then on the back of that workshop for a decision to come back to the committee on a prioritised district planning changes work program. I'm happy to move that. Is there a seconder? Tim? Any discussion?
Note that we requested, even if it's just not formal resolution, but noted we requested an update on the audit of the resource consenting decision making.
That's a matter for the committee that Tim chairs on regulatory performance. Okay. The resource consent decision making isn't a matter, or the audit of the resource consent decision making isn't a matter for this committee.
Well, that's okay, so we'll pick it up at Tim's committee. Yeah.
Excellent. Okay, all those in favour? Opposed? Carried. Resolution of parking payments method. I think this one's really straightforward. I'm happy to move it. Sam seconds. Any questions? Really?
Can just like I was yeah.
So just wondered why the council can't be involved in the council buildings, parking buildings can't be involved in this.
So the
trial. Yes.
Yeah. So the trial. So we've identified that we need to do a trial, and
Yes,
the
sorry,
purpose of doing a trial was to ensure that we could check that it works fully, but also it's the best way for us to integrate a new technological system, I guess, with our existing parking meter systems. So the app provider is working fully with the meter provider so that the process for parkers and for our compliance team is consistent with what we have currently.
So basically you want to kind of iron out any glitches perhaps before it's...
Well, additionally we have different providers within our parking buildings.
Different technology
and different technology. Yeah. So we have definitely ensured that our trial provider is able to work with our various technologies, but we want to ensure that it works out on the streets, I guess, before we introduce it more widely, potentially.
Okay, one other quick question. We have so much of great technology happening in the city and so much information that people can access, but I find that a lot of people don't know that it's there. What are your thoughts in terms of how do we communicate this and roll it out in a way that people will know about it and be able to access it?
Well, we have got a plan in terms of how we communicate and share it. And I think, advertising and using our current avenues that we use for promoting new initiatives, we'll be using all of those, but equally we'll be ensuring that our compliance officers encouraging people to use it, and we'd also encourage councillors and obviously our staff will be sharing the information in terms of its availability.
Great. So you'll have staff people on the ground kind of thing that people can ask and talk to and get help from if they need it.
Yeah. And additionally, there will be stickers on the meters which people will be able to visually see that it's available as well, and they can get information.
Thank you. Yanni?
Thank you. I was quite interested why this would cost $10,000, and also the people that provide the app, do they get a percentage of the parking fee, or does the customer have to pay 50 cents to use the app every time they park?
It is part of exploring the market. We needed to look at the cost. $10,000 is actually extremely good value. Basically, we are the provider is able to assist us with putting it in place at a significantly reduced cost compared with all the other councils that are currently using apps like this. The provider themselves will be getting a transaction fee which is equivalent to a 50-cent charge that we currently have on our meters, but through the credit card payment.
Have we got any figures about how much, like Vodafone, is it Vodafone that gets the money off the parking meters at the moment, or what the anticipated revenue is for the people that use the app? Like, what's the projection in terms of how much money those companies are getting from our on-street parking?
No, I don't think so. I mean, that's going to be depending on how much uptake there is, I suppose. So, like I said, we're doing a trial to see how successful it is and see what the demand is, and part of that will be linked to how much it's used.
You must have some idea with the current regime how much the people are clipping the ticket and how much money they're making from that.
Yeah, well, we could find that. I don't have that information at hand, but
right.
Yeah.
Is there any chance for us, you would think if we go to an app, you would think the cost of transaction should be significantly less than the cost of sending a text message, or even with changes to banking fees.
Yeah, Yanni, this is a trial, so we'll get a lot of data and information back.
Also,
from
when
the
do we
trial.
how do we get a say in how much?
People are still able to use cash and not have to pay a transaction fee or an app fee. So,
well, actually,
are there any other questions?
So, just in terms of the transaction fee, who gets to set how much that is, and how do we get a say in that as council at government?
Okay, this is a trial, so I'm sure we'll get a lot of information back from the trial. Is there any other questions? All right. Any debate? Yanni?
So I just think, personally, I find it abhorrent that these companies make huge amounts per transaction for people going to park. If people want to park for less than an hour, they're paying a huge percentage of their parking fee in the transactional cost, and I just don't think that these costs can be justified. So I actually am not going to support this today. I think $10,000 is a huge amount of money, and then the company is going to be making a whole bunch of profit off a very low cost transaction. For someone to download an app, have it on their phone, use their data to pay for it, I cannot understand why that company should get 50 cents off every transaction, especially if we're paying to use this app as a city. So I won't support this today. I think we need much more financial transparency over how these things are being worked out and who's profiting off them. But I think we want people coming into our city, and to have people paying additional charges to pay to use the parking meters is not something I'll support.
Since we're in debate, let's debate it. I'm pretty sure you can still use cash.
Mm-hmm.
So just bring that thing called, I know Jamie's got none, but it's called money. He's too young. But he told me last time, he goes, who carries cash? What a heathen. But the, yeah, you can carry, old timers like James can bring coins. Yeah. So just, Yanni, I'd do a Facebook post and encourage people to still bring coins to town. They'll be welcome. We'll take them.
All those in favour? Against? Carry. Do you want that recorded, Yanni? All right, the first item back is item 8, MCR Heathcote Expressway, section 1B, Charles Street to Tannery, no stop-in restrictions. Were you moving it? Okay. Moved. Any questions? All those in favour? Carried. Okay, we'll move on to the transport report. Sorry. Thanks, Richard. Do you just want to give us some of the highlights before we have questions?
Sure, thank you, Mr. Chair. My name is Richard Osborne. I'm the Head of Transport in the City Services Group. So perhaps it might be worthwhile me introducing a few of the key staff that you'll get to know and hopefully love over the next 3 years. Stephen Thomas, who's the Manager of Ops, Mark Pinner, Maintenance, and you already know Lynette, who's Manager of Planning and Delivery. So they all sit within the City Services Group. There's a fourth team or unit as such, and that's the Christchurch Transport Operations Centre, so that's CTOC. They don't technically report through to me as such because they are a partnership with NZTA and Environment Canterbury, and they report to a board, and that's currently managed by a chap called Simon Harty. So they're the four kind of main teams within the City Services Group, and there's a strategic transport team that reports to David Griffiths. So just so you know that. So we've been doing this report to what was the, back then the Infrastructure Transport Environment Committee in the previous term of council, and it's really just a bit of an overview of the transport activities over a kind of 2 month period. So it's reasonably broad, wide-ranging, and provides update on capital, CTOC, operations and maintenance activities, as well as some of the strategic transport issues within council. So I think in terms of highlights, certainly one of the highlights of the last month or so was the completion of the section of the coastal pathway, and that was very positive. It was good to get done between Shag Rock and Sumner Surf Lifesaving Club. We do have further sections of that which are kind of, we still need to do work on, but it was very good to get that completed, and I think everyone's positive about it. One of the things which is challenging us at the moment is the NZTA funding, and I certainly did some reasonably extensive briefings to the previous council, and there was a resolution of the previous council about not progressing with some of the capital projects unless we had funding guaranteed. So we are working our way through that with NZTA, but it is taking us some time to get agreement from them, and that is having a potential impact on this year's capital delivery of the transport program. So just something to bring to your attention, that is slowing us down in terms of delivery of the transport capital infrastructure projects. Underway we have the road resurfacing program. This year we're going to be doing 98 odd Ks, which is the most we've done since the earthquakes. So we're up to around 4% of the overall network, which is a big increase over the last few years of what we've completed. The industry average is still around 7 to 8%, so we're below what most other territorial authorities do throughout the country. But what you should see around Christchurch at the moment is an improvement on those grade 5 roads, which are the ones which are in the poorest condition. We do have all that information on the map, which we've referred to in the report, so those communities should have an appreciation or an understanding of what's coming their way. We also do a lot of work, and this is part of the work that Stephen Thomas does and the operations team. We do travel demand management as well as transport safety. So we have things like the Kickstart program, which I referenced in the covering report, which is something we do in combination with Selwyn and Waimak district councils. And it's really a safety program for motorcycles because they're one of our more vulnerable users. So that just gives you a bit of a flavour of some of the things that we are involved in with the community in terms of safety. We also do a lot of work with schools and with businesses that come into the central city about reducing their carbon footprint and using cycleways, buses, where the car parks are, just travel planning and good information to the community. So that's the overview. I'm happy to take any questions.
Tim, then Aaron.
Yeah, just a couple with regards to on page 95. Where is it? It just mentions here the Apauho River route.
Yep.
Some time ago, there was a very good document, the Apauho Heathcote River Master Plan, which council did, which was an outstanding document and was totally consulted on and brought in with regards to the community. So with yourselves and the drainage team to look at and include that document in your planning would be a very good way forward, because the entire community in that part of the river, which stretched from Princess Margaret right through, and Melanie, you can correct me if I'm wrong, through to about Hanson's Park, that was totally brought into by all of the communities. So that would be a really good one to include. Secondly, with the southern motorway coming in, the expected extra traffic that's going to bring, putting pressure on from Henderson's Road right through Centaurus, Cashmere to Port Hills, just looking at timing with regards to the Hoon-Hay Wolseley intersection and other areas because of the developments that are going in along Cashmere Road and also in the Wolseley, the Cashmere Basin. If we could just get an update of when that's happening. And
Yep, so you're right, the Christchurch Southern Motorway is due to open in the middle of next year, as is the Christchurch Northern Corridor, so both due to open at the same time. Broadly, we're doing a business case looking at Morehouse and Brougham Street with New Zealand Transport Agency as to how we manage the impacts of that. In terms of the Worsley's intersection, I think it's out in 21.
It's in 20 and 21. Financial year 20, it's got budget across both years. We're currently working with NZTR on that one. That's one we're trying to get through their process at the moment.
Because we do have a large development in the Cashmere Valley. We've also got the development.
But the development hasn't, but the development hasn't reached the number of lots being.
There's a threshold as part of that they make a contribution to the costs, I think. So until they kick into that threshold, if we were to go ahead and do it ahead of that, it's my understanding that we couldn't get costs from them. So we need to wait for that threshold to be met, and we also need to satisfy NZTA to attract their funding. So it is on our books, but there's a few hoops for us to go through first.
I think there does need to be a bit of discussion with that, because the adventure park is up 30%, so there's a lot of cyclists, there's a lot of community angst with regards to that intersection and the Heathcote Bridge just there. There's no cycle safety, it's growing, but there's also that development just maybe 500 metres down the road on Cashmere Road that I don't think's been put into the equation. There's a lot of issues in that community with regards to that and the pressures that are coming onto it. So yeah, it would be very good to talk to the developer to see if we can move that forward.
Aaron.
Got three quick ones, Richard. The first being around some of the school safety programs and the getting kids to active transport to school, mainly around page 96. With Gardner's Road from Sawyers Arms going north, it's semi-rural. We've dropped the speed there to 60k. There's no footpath there. There's a little bit where the new subdivision's gone in, but a lot without. How would we fast track getting a shared path through there for the kids going to Breens, Cotswold, Emmanuel, Casebrook and Papanui? Is there any programs that, or should we just put it in as a board bid for the annual plan, long-term plan?
I'm not aware of anything that's currently in our annual plan or long-term plan, so we'd need to, or the council would need to resolve to put something in or direct us, get a project in there for us to
and
go
so
through
the best way for that would just be via the board with its bids, or is there a better way?
Probably through the board in the first instance, would be my thinking, and then we would need to have a look into it and provide you with a bit of advice, and then it would come through council to resolve to include it. But I guess the consequential impact of that, depending on costs, something might have to drop out or it'd have to be included in a program of work somewhere. So look, that's probably a point for further discussion about funding and everything else. But
and I know NZTA is not really giving you a clear steer at the moment, but if they are up for new footpaths in particular areas where people don't have the option, I would have thought that a Greens Labour coalition might have been into that, for getting kids to walk.
I think the original question about where to bring the project idea from was answered.
Okay, cool. Then two more. So page 96, Wings to Wheels. It said route selection is completed and undertaking from preliminary scheme design. So that we did finalise the route there, because there was...
No, sorry, the route hasn't met, so they have done the route selection activity, as in identifying all of the multiple routes that you could have.
Yes.
Then they haven't gone very far down the path
so
of preferred
this
facility,
refers to that bit that's
and
done.
then you have to go out and have the consultation with the community, but we haven't done near that yet. So we haven't got to that point. They've done the multi-criteria analysis of all the different routes possible.
Okay, and then finally, a few months ago, when the council signed off the support for some traffic lights, and I forget the intersection, might be Harewood, Breens, it's somewhere around there. You were going to go away and look for some funding options for that.
Yes.
Any update at this point?
It doesn't ring a bell. Do you remember?
Does a few sirens.
No, we'd have to come back to you on that one, Councillor.
We'll be back early in the new year with that with a memo to the committee in time for you to be able to incorporate anything you need to into the annual plan.
Excellent. Yanni?
Thanks for the report. It's a shame we don't have a road cone to put on the award winner for the number of most potholes per kilometre, which is the Linwood ward. But have you got any Cashmere's second? So you can get the bronze one or the silver one, and I'll get the gold one. But have you got any sense of, like, when I look at that statistic, it seems quite weird, like Cashmere versus Linwood. Have you got any analysis as to why those two wards in particular have a higher representation?
So you're looking at the table on page 101, which so what we've attempted to do here, just for the councillors' benefit, is show you some of the work that we're doing in terms of the maintenance component of council. So that's what Mark manages, and just as background, we have 4 maintenance contracts: one for Banks, one for Southern, one for Central City, and one for Northern. So the activity in that one, we've just used potholes as an example of some of the things that we do. And if you look at the next column, it's got the job. So that's the number of customer services requests, and then the value itself. Look, to answer your question though, councillor, I think there's obviously some streets, particularly in the east and the south, where the quality of them are very poor. So you've got a high number of potholes. Costs us a lot of money to continue to maintain those streets, because the streets really need to be either resurfaced or renewed, and it's not a good spend for us not to do that, because you just continuing plugging holes in the street, and the street, to put it mildly, is kind of stuffed, and it's far better for us to go in there, sweep in, do the resurfacing program and upgrade it, then you get less of them. So, Mark, I don't know if you've got anything to add to that, other than the reason why there's probably more there is because there's probably more grade 5s.
Yeah, I mean, this table was really just to give you an idea at this stage, just in terms of the activity and how it's distributed across the whole, and it is just in that table just the OPEX, so it is just really our reactive work, say faults that do occur, and we prioritise them and address them as needed. So it is reflective, as you indicate, of obviously the investment in the asset through capital spend, etc. But it's also reflective by the same thing of what happened in those areas post the earthquake. So if there's a lot of trenching, for example, in those areas, that trenching is now opening up along the joints, etc., then we will be, in that case, doing probably more pothole repairs. And so our modelling of our investment for where we go in to do the capital works, the reseals, etc., does take into account all of these things on this table. Right. And where that activity is increasing and getting larger, that is what drives the need for what we do in terms of putting a chip seal or an AC down.
So do we get the pothole data at a street level as well, or the complaint? So is that we can actually look at specific streets and say, yeah, you know, there's been 100 on this street, therefore that's a priority? Is that?
We can get down to that level, but when we've got 20,000 potholes per year, we need to work on the modelling to actually drive the need for that investment behind it in terms of the capital investment. Those numbers there also are, in terms of the total number of jobs, are not just in the road, they are on the road, footpath, curb and tunnel, attending to signs, even possibly some extra sweeping that might be needed as well. So we would really need to analyse it to actually understand what's going on, and that's what we're trying to do, is trying to drive that visually by some of the dashboards we're looking at to understand operationally what's going on.
Cool. Just when we do the resealing, I've had the case in Ferry Road, we reseal the road but we don't do the footpath at the same time. Have you got the ability where you're resealing a road and the footpath needs to be resealed to actually just do it together and save money and have efficiency?
Yes. If the footpath is to be resealed, we can do them at the same time. So, and we do that. As was alluded to earlier on, NZTA now fund up to 50% for the footpaths. They didn't used to do that. So we do attract NZTA funding for it. And but sometimes the carriageway is not in the same condition as the footpath.
Right. Thank you. As a matter of course, that will be done. Yeah.
And this is really good data, but I just want the members just to not try and create competition between it if we're breaking it down. And actually, I look at the amount of work done in the Linwood ward, and it's actually really good. So it shouldn't be seen as a negative. Melanie, did you have?
I've got two questions. One is following on from Tim. So, because I didn't realise we were kind of waiting for development contributions. I thought we were just going ahead with the Worsleys, Hoonhay. Have I understood that correctly? And I don't understand the NZTA component you talked about, and it might. So if you can talk to that now, but it might also be good to go back to the community board about this because they're quite, fielding complaints about it.
Yeah. So in terms of the NZTA funding, so they will fund up to normally 51% of eligible projects. So with this one being a safety issue, we might attract more funding from them, and we have to put in essentially a business case to them, and they need to approve that, and it needs to kind of go through a process internally within that organisation. And once they do that, then the direction on us is to proceed with the project. If we'd previously thought it wasn't going to be funded by NZTA and they dropped it off the list, council didn't want us to go and spend a whole lot of money for stuff that wasn't going to attract their funding. So that's what we're in the middle of at the moment. Now, in terms of the resource consent, it's my understanding that the development has some type of consent condition on it, which means that a contribution kicks in when they have certain number of lots sold or built on or something akin to that. I'm not aware of the details, and it's my understanding they haven't met that threshold as yet. Mm-hmm. So us doing it ahead of either of those two things happening would mean that we would have to fund it ourselves, as opposed to attracting funding from the developer and or funding from NZTA. But that's my broad understanding. I'm not that close to the detail on it, and be happy to bring something back to the community board.
It'd be really good because we had a deputation last board meeting about it.
So my understanding was that there had been something back to the board and back to submitters recently, but I will follow up on that after this. If it's not gone, it is due to go in the next day or so. It looks like it's a crossover.
Yeah. And then the other question, well, is just about the annual walk and wheel to school day. I think that would be information about the schools. Again, would be good actually just to go out to community boards about it, because that's where that would be, you know, I mean, I'd like to have a, you know, be involved in that, and I'm sure community board members would too. So if that could just information of those schools just go out as a process, that would be good.
Well, just on that, one of the things we have struggled with over the past 3 years was getting information out to community boards, and obviously we provided this report to the ITI committee, and then it went up to council, but we are trying to look at ways of kind of better informing community boards, particularly of things around the resurfacing program, which we don't consult on or anything. It's really information to people. So that a lot of that is up online, but it's just finding I guess an efficient way of kind of updating community boards on all the things that is happening in their ward.
But that kind of thing could be a briefing now about resurfacing, because it's the start of the term. You could do it early next year for all new board members that know that that's available on the website, that they don't know about it. You know, I don't know.
Dave Adamson is popping out with Ruth Cable, who's the head of the PMO, and he's going to be speaking to community boards next year on the what we've got on the website now, which is the capital program. It's not just transport, but it's the whole capital program, and that's all on the council website. And he will, Mike Jacobson, who's the team leader of asset management within council, he will go with them on some of those and speak to the resurfacing program.
Mike's also looking to speak to there's a meeting in February with all elected members and community board members are invited to look to do a presentation at that, and then provide you with some briefing notes for all of the boards that all of the boards will have on their servicing program. Cool. So we've just gone on a bit further than what Richard had done. Cool.
Thank you. As someone that's new to the Transport Committee and therefore new to looking at this report in this level of detail, referring to the very last part of the report, strategic transport, realising that the note there is that there's quite a bit of detail to come back to us in February. If I was interested in looking at how so I don't know whether that Christchurch transport plan picks up what I'm going to ask or not. It may or it may not. So the link between transport and urban development, the partnership opportunities with the regional council, with neighbouring territorial authorities, with NZTA and with government. So thinking of projects that we've seen elsewhere in the country, like the Auckland Transport Alignment Project, or Let's Get Wellington Moving, $28 million, $6 billion. Where does that conversation in the Christchurch context get elevated? Is that in the strategic transport part of this report? Or does it go somewhere else? I mean, some of that's Greater Christchurch Partnership, it's the Regional Transport Committee. There are other places those conversations are going on, but where do we get oversight and reporting of those conversations? Are they through this report or somewhere else?
So I'm familiar with ATAP and the Let's Get Welly moving. We have conversations with NZTA on a regular basis. This refers to the business cases. If you look at section 6 on page 114, it does refer to the business cases for future public transport, and we are looking to approve the consultants this week or early next. For PT, the discussions would happen at the Joint Public Transport Committee. For transport which is outside of that, but which is sub-regional, it would happen at the partnership. And in terms of that being reported back to council, yes, some of that would be incorporated within this report here. It's just at the moment there's more information in terms of the strategic transport than there is in this particular one. It's just that there's been a bit of a hiatus in terms of some of those discussions over the last few months. So there's a little bit less information in here than you'd normally see.
So if we had
there quickly, Andrew, because there is a number of joint committees, Greater Christchurch Partnership, Joint PT, that we will be reporting back onto this committee this term. So there is much better oversight for all councillors. So that will be included in agendas.
So I guess if I translate what I'm saying, if we were keen to, really lift some of that work up, get good oversight of it and push things along, given that, Auckland and Wellington have obviously seen some success in this space, this committee would be the place to do that through that reporting. Yeah, great, thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much for that. Hey, in terms of the reseal stuff, so we're at about 4.1%. I just wondered, just to get a bit of context, what would it cost us a year, or in terms of a budget bid, to get it back to the industry average? How much more would we need to put in to resealing our roads?
4 million a percent.
Yeah.
It's about $4 million for every percent you want to raise it.
Okay,
A lot.
cool. So about 15 mil, 16 mil. Cool, thank you.
Thank you. I was just going back to the Worsley, and I don't want to get to be like a broken record like someone else, but with regards to that, when we talk about the Kashmir, the so many sections or whatever that process, and I can find out from the regs team anyway, but is that what's driving it, the vehicle numbers that will increase in the intersection, or is it we're waiting for the money?
I think it would probably be best for us to go and find out more about it.
Yeah.
My understanding of it is at a pretty high level, and I'm not across the details,
Yeah.
so my preference would be to come back to you on that,
Okay.
lest I give you some incorrect information.
Yeah.
And if there is a memo which has already been written, more than happy to bring it back here or to the community board or both.
If you could, because my understanding was early on that it was going, when we went out to public consultation, and it was an excellent consultation, I have to say, which we were involved with as in the community board. It was 1920 was going to be, then it got 20 to 21 because of our financial issues, which is totally understandable. But my issue is I believe the intersection is dangerous now because...
I'm going to jump in here because it's clearly an issue with you and Melanie, so
Okay.
staff are aware of it and they'll report back on where it's at with the community board.
Yeah.
Thanks. Phil?
With the chip seal patching, and I know exactly what Dave's saying, with the chip seal, no matter how clever someone is, I know you've got to patch it and you're not allowed to chip seal over it for a year. Is that right, Dave? Can we instead, and I know how much work's involved in digging out low spots and filling it up with asphalt and topping them up, then waiting the year, are we not better off to just do the carriageway, not with the cars park, just with asphalt straight away? Would it be cheaper?
Not always, no. So it's not always that simple. Mark would talk to that better, but also even when we're going to do our resurfacing, we are looking at that every time.
Yeah,
so we look at it every time. We look at the pavement construction every time we do it, and whether we have a surface or a deep.
Because sometimes you drive along, you've got a bumpy road, and you go, that's cool, so you put some asphalt on it, no matter how clever you are as a contractor putting it on, you always still fill the bumps.
Yep.
And then you chip seal over it in a year's time, and it's definitely better than it was, but it ain't right compared to what an asphalt one would be.
So asphalt and chip seal surfacing are used for different levels of road as well, and that's all determined.
But should we just be saying that what I'm getting at is the cost of doing it twice, patching it, then waiting, and then chip sealing it and getting a road that's not quite up to speed, whereas just doing asphalt on the carriageway but only not where the cars park, would it be about the same cost?
No.
Asphalt is 6 or 7 times the cost of chip seal. So what you normally need to do, if other services...
Not in our subdivisions, it's not.
Yeah.
Sorry, I'm not talking about milling it out 50 mil deep or anything like that. I'm just talking. Take the likes of, say, Burwood Road, where there's been lots of repairs done to it, which are good repairs, but they've all settled 5 or 10 or 15 mil, and it's like a washing board going along it. Rather than go along and dig them out in asphalt, then make it as good as you possibly can, then waiting the year, like Dave said, and then chip sealing it, and ending up with something that is better but not right. Would we be not better just to go straight down the road with paver on top of chip seal, like we do when we do a prime coat on a subdivision? Use that existing chip seal.
As Lynette said, we do hopefully look at all those options, and certainly for my part, I do need my team and our contractors to explore those more wholly each and every time to actually achieve best value in doing so. And there are opportunities, and there have been sites certainly over New Brighton, forget the road. I think it's Union Street, where we have done something akin to that, where we have done it just in the carriageway and not on the shoulders, for example.
Because I can understand here it's expensive if you mill it down like you've done round Cranmer Square and stuff like that. That's expensive. I know that's expensive. Okay, now that's cool. Now, one other thing is, guys, what do I have to do to get New Brighton Road closer to the pointy end of the money stick?
Phil, you've probably heard a lot of similar questions about ward projects or community board projects, and the best place actually is have a conversation with your community board to start with. And?
It's the ultimate. It's the ultimate. It's the one we all want.
I'm just cutting to the chase.
Change the subject completely. Sorry, I've just lost the walkway to in wheels program, and would be great, as Mel said, to actually have a list of the schools that were involved, so that we can. Do they have events around them, or is it just something the school kind of enrolls for, and then it just sort of rolls out, or do we do a big rah-rah thing?
It's a national program, so it's a national thing, and a lot of the schools will do their own events. They do it, and I know they work through Thomas's team there's some coordination through that, so I'm sure we can let you know reasonably easily what schools are involved and signed up to it.
Fantastic, thank you. And a second question about footpaths. When someone comes with a complaint about a footpath, and we put it in for, as a report, is there a matrix that you measure that footpath condition against and prioritise according to whether elderly are going to be affected, that sort of thing?
Yes.
Okay. So if something became a new situation, how much flexibility do you have? So if we become aware of a new hazard, can it be pushed up the list, or is it basically, so it's about perhaps proving that it needs to be addressed. Okay, that's helpful. Thirdly, the information that you've got here, all you need to do is send the links to the community board advisors, and they would be able to actually share that around to the community board members. Would probably be one way of spreading that knowledge.
Thanks, Anne.
Helpful. Thank you.
Jimmy?
Okay, thank you. Also, I follow in the question footpath renewal, and because in at least probably citywide or at least the Hornby area, quite a few of the footpaths, some are quick, some are pothole, but at the same time, particularly the autumn time, there is a lichen quite serious, so they cause the pedestrian safety issue. I just want to know whether those lichen remove, whether we have any plan, is part of this transport, is part of the
We do deal with
service.
lichen, and we do spray it to remove it periodically as needed, basically. So if there is a particular location, the easiest way is to either pass that on or obviously raise a service request, and then we would look at it, we'd prioritise it and do the work as needed.
Also request by the residents, am I right? Request
if they report it, we will.
The CSR is
CSR.
take it. Okay, thank
you, Jimmy. Yanni?
I was just looking at your cycleways and trying to figure out, so you say that there's no funding allocated for the Pawaho River route, so no work has started. So is there any is it correct that there's no money in the LTP for that?
No, sorry, there's money for it, but it is out later in the LTP. There is no money.
Do you know what year that is?
It is out in 26, 27, 25, 26, something like that.
Right. So what I was trying to understand is you've started the early stages of route selection definition for the Avon-Otakaro route, which has got similar issues in terms of the funding. We've got all the land drainage stuff happening along the Pawaho River route, but no work has started. What do we need to do to get work started to look at the preliminary route selection so that we can incorporate it in the land drainage work?
I think, sorry, this was a decision made at the long-term plan for this budget, and there'll be opportunities in the annual plan to actually bring money forward if you actually want it to be done
It's
in
not about the
conjunction
budget.
with,
That's if you
with
read
other
the
works.
first one, the over no Takaro, it's not about the budget. It's the same issue with the budget for that one, and work started.
We haven't progressed either of them particularly far because they're out towards the end of the current LTP. However, if they get brought forward as part of the 21 to 31 LTP, then the work will be progressed. So I wouldn't read too much into what's in there. They're at very early stages, but they are different because we've got the Otakaro River Corridor Region Plan for the Otakaro, and then for the Opawaho, it's really land drainage are doing a lot of work in that space, and we're looking to come in after that and really do the intersections and the crossings as much as anything. Is that correct, Lynette? Yeah. So quite different, similar but different if you see what I mean, because different processes, but neither of them are particularly far advanced. It's just that one was subject to a region plan and the other hasn't been.
So
Thank you.
how much would you require just to do the high level kind of route selection analysis for the Opawaho River one, so that we can see if there's any synergy? And I'll just remind the chair and the councillors, there is a resolution through council to get synergy around projects in the same geographic area that has been outstanding for several years now. And here's a classic example of where it's not happening.
Thank you, Yanni. We can take that offline. I'm happy to.
So can I just get the
move
answer to the question? How much money they require?
We are carrying on with it. We are doing the team. The note in the report says the team is working with the land drainage team to ensure design solutions.
This continually gets raised and it continually gets answered.
But it's not
you have an opportunity through the annual plan and through board bids to try and bring things
So can
forward.
we get told then how much we need to
well,
put the bid in for?
You can ask that question offline. Pauline?
Shag Rock, Cycleway, the Rapinari Shag Rock, section 3, and on page 95 we're saying that we're planning to lodge resource consent in April, May. So where we got to with the ITI committee was, I believe, that we were actually, even though we had selected one option as the preferred route, that with the level of concern and objections, and we were actually prepared to revisit that decision if the ecological reports came back.
Yep.
So what consent are we going to lodge? Are we going to lodge one for both options, or?
So the first bullet point ahead of those says that we have to finalise the ecological report. Then we have to update the multi-criteria analysis on what the right solution is. Then we have to come back and update this committee. Then, subject to all of that, we may lodge consent. That's just our indicative timeline of what we think. So we've still got to do all of that work.
Yeah, because that was going to be my question about the timeline for those reports, because they've been in the pipeline for many months now.
Yeah, they have. They've taken quite a while. They're very detailed reports.
Yeah, and when are you expecting to see?
So they're the draft combined report, because I think there's been 3, if not 4, ecological reports done. So we're looking to try and combine a report that gives the committee one picture of all of them, rather than you having to read everything. A draft is due to us in the next few days.
And the Ihutai Trust were happy with the authors of those reports?
They were happy with the authors.
Great.
Is my understanding.
Yep.
Whether they still are, I'm not aware of any concerns. But
and will they get to see them at the same time as us? Or?
They'll get to see them at the same time as the public does. Yes.
Okay, thank you. That's good.
Am I? Sorry, are you debating or? That's all right. Sorry, Dan. Thank you. All those in favour? Against? Carried. Thank you. Okay, we'll move to item 6, Gloucester Street Enlivened Places Project, traditional streetscape amenity and pedestrian improvements. Thank you very much. I'll allow you to introduce the...
Sure.
Actually, I think Pauline was going to introduce the report as it went through the ITE committee first.
Was I? I'm just finding it now because if you push the wrong button, everything collapses. Yeah. So yeah, this did come through ITE in June this year, and I'm kind of regretting that we didn't just pass it then, because what we did was we actually agreed with the concept and the design and the principles that was going to address safety and slow traffic and create a pleasant, fun environment and a good connection between Victoria Square and New Regent Street. But there was a suggestion that we would like a bit more fun sort of feature in there, which is why staff have gone away, and it looks like they've worked hard on that and come back with this option of the pukeko. But consequently, I see that the budget has increased for it, the costs have increased. But as I said, the committee did approve this in principle, but they requested an addition of some other fun factor in there. So that's where we got to, and that's why it's come back here today with the addition. So I think that's a bit of an overview of where we got to. Yeah.
Do you want to add anything to... Yes, that's fine.
Introduce myself, I'm Carolyn Bonnis, I'm team leader of the Urban Regeneration team, and with me is Katie Smith, who manages the Enliven Places program. This is an Enliven Places project, and Stefan, because this is a joint report that was put up through ITI committee, in addition to the commentary around the additional fun feature, there was also some discussion around potentially changing the location of one of the crossings so as to avoid people crossing in between two mobility parking spaces. And so some further engineering work and advice was taken, and that has resulted in attachment C to the report, which covers both of those elements of the proposal. If you're looking at a range of options for where to go to from here, then you're possibly looking at either the full component of the full design with the fun feature that was requested. You could potentially run with the option that doesn't include the fun feature. You could pull right back to it not being an Enliven Places project and potentially adding some additional bike stands, or of course there's the do nothing option. Katie, who's managing the program, might have a couple of additional points to make as well.
As Pauline, Councillor Cotter pointed out, this is about improving the wayfinding and amenity of the pedestrian environment. It's about providing informal crossing points, because at the moment the only formal crossing places are at the corners with Manchester and Colombo streets. Many people cross informally along this street, and as I said, making those connections between the Performing Arts Precinct, Turanga, Victoria Square, etc. Gloucester Street recently underwent some resurfacing works, and all the white lines were repainted. There's no further planned works in the foreseeable future. The Enliven Places project will seek to provide these transitional streetscape amenity improvements for the next few years. We're also looking at increasing parking facilities. There were 3 cycle stands there prior to this. We're going to hopefully replace that with a corral of 6 cycle stands. The project will not result in a net loss of any car parking spaces. And as mentioned, the Infrastructure and Transport Environment Committee requested that this unique feature, fun feature, be added, which we've done in-house to reduce or keep the costs low.
Thank you. Just a couple of small things. In 2.3, it says the project is expected to be in place for approximately 5 years ahead of permanent street renewal works. But then in 4.4, it says that there's permanent streetscape and design works are not programmed in the LTP, which is 10 years. I'm just wondering which it is.
So I think at the time that we wrote the original report, There was planned in the LTP, but then
Okay.
it's since changed.
Okay. And the bike stands, so the current plan has sort of a corral permanently in the road space of 6, is that right?
Permanent, again, all
It's
of
a
the
temporary
Enliven
one.
Places projects are temporary.
But what happened to the old bike stands that were there?
So when the road had the resurfacing done, those were taken out. At that particular point, there was you may remember there was a painted surface.
Yeah.
So that was taken out, and they were taken out at that point because we wanted to increase the numbers and put in something that was a bit more interesting.
Okay, no, that's cool. And the resolution up there talks about, as outlined in attachment A, but it would be attachment C now, wouldn't it? That if we went ahead with that.
That's
okay,
right.
thanks.
Thanks, Mike. Apologies, I didn't ask this before the meeting. I normally would have, but that being said, just for a bit of clarity for me around the financial implication, the cost to implement on page 15 of the report states 40,000, and then the itemised cost estimates on page 21, excluding any mention of the Pakeco sculptures, state 60,000. So I'm just wondering which one it is.
So it is the higher amount now. When we start our projects, we usually put a sum aside, but you may appreciate that each of these elements are bespoke, and we can get some indicative pricing, but we've also had the safety report and we've had to change the design. So before we were looking at doing almost 4 that were the same, but they've all had to change. So with that specialisation and addition of safety items, the costs have gone up.
Brilliant, all good. And just one final other one. Is there any reason why you didn't include the cost as part of the resolution? And if there is no real reason why, could you do that in future? Because it's quite important.
For the it's right.
Kind of
okay.
any report, to be fair.
It's part of the report.
Unless there was a reason why it wasn't, but if not, that would be nice. What's that? Then why is it at council if it's delegated?
So my understanding, and correct me if I'm wrong, is this program would normally have staff delegation, but because it has a transport component, it has to come through to the committee.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
But if you could just have the financial implication of the cost in the resolution, that would be good.
Thank you. Yes, mine was a question about the funding too. So just for clarification, it's 60,000 without the Pakeco. Yep.
That's right.
And do you know when the court theatre work may be due to start? And would that have an impact on this transitional work?
So the dates of I'm not 100% sure on the dates of when the court theatre would start, but as far as I know, because these works and they can all be picked up and moved. That's part of a project. They're all transitional, so they can be picked up and moved elsewhere, but they wouldn't interfere with that. In fact, although there's going to be an alleyway or a laneway that goes through the performing arts precinct, and although we don't know exactly where that is, it will be somewhere in the vicinity of where the crossing opposite Turanga temporarily is. So it could align with that. Or it could be moved in the future
so
to work with that.
Even if the court theatre work started in the next year or 2 or 3, it wouldn't not affect this work. It's not going to impact on Gloucester Street like Turanga did, which is why we had to move the stuff previously.
I can't say whether or not the construction of the court theatre would come out onto the pavement. That's not. But if it were to, then we can pick these elements up and move them elsewhere. Or we could, along Gloucester Street, or we could use them in other parts of the city.
Fantastic, because that was going to be my next question, so you've answered that. That's really good. And what was my third question was going to be? Can I come back to it? It's just wandered off.
Thank you. Pauline has just asked the question I was going to ask about the court theatre, because I think that is relevant. And I mean, it's not even how this project affects the court theatre development. It's more how the court theatre development affects this. Because we're creating amenity, and if there's a major construction going on down there that reduces or possibly even destroys amenity, then there is an element of why would you bother doing this if that was happening in the near future? I'd be quite keen to have an answer to the question that Pauline asked so that we can take that into consideration. And I don't know whether that's something that someone can find out. I'm guessing it would be reasonably easy while we're having this Q&A and debate.
So we are seeking expressive interest from architectural firms to do the concept designs. Construction's expected to start in February 2021.
So right in the middle of the period in which this would be here.
February.
Presumably that construction will involve noise and dust and delivery of materials and all the same things that touring are involved.
Undoubtedly, but as Katie said, until we've got any designs and we know what the construction program will look like, we don't know the extent of the impact out onto Gloucester Street. It might well be on Armagh Street, it might be on Colombo Street, so that'll be something that needs to get figured out over the next year or so.
So now to my, so that was just a comment on Pauline's question really. Now to my real question. The cycle corral, 6 stands, $13,000. In the report there's a picture of what looks like an enhanced cycle stand. Is that the 13,000 is for that enhanced cycle stand, not just the regular cycle stands like the ones that we've got on, for example, St Asaph Street?
Yes, it is, but it's going to be movable because it comes in a corral that can be put down onto the street. It also includes wheel stops and corner posts, which we need for safety-wise. It is enhanced, and it's part of, the Enliven Places programme, bringing interest and life and vitality to the central city.
So what's the, just by comparison, what's the cost of just the normal steel ring or whatever they're made of, cycle stands, just the regular ones? If we went for a functionality rather than appearance approach, what would it cost?
I'm not sure. I don't have the information. Sorry, for what a standard cycle stand costs.
Presumably, this is more expensive.
Potentially.
I'm keen to know how much more expensive.
For the those other types of cycle corrals, they are around 8,000. I'm not sure how to describe those.
So they're like the ones, the temporary ones that have been put outside Riverside Markets, the yellow ones. So for that pickup and that's $8,000, but in terms of our standard cycle sort of loop type, I just don't have the information, sorry.
But in terms of something temporary, what we've just heard then is that there is a cheaper alternative, which would be $8,000 rather than $13,000 with the same functionality. Thank you.
Similar functionality, a different look.
Yep, thank you.
Yep.
Thank you, and thanks for the work and thanks for responding to our discussion at the committee. One of our members who we all know and love really wanted this fun aspect to be present, and you've responded to that, so thank you. If we didn't spend the money here, are we able to transfer the money to somewhere like Plymouth Lane or somewhere like that?
The Enliven Places budget is a capital budget that's available for this financial year, and we have a number of projects that we've either already committed to or that are upcoming. So yes, if this project doesn't go ahead, there is still the Enliven, that it would go back into the bucket of Enliven Places funding to do other Enliven Places projects. Okay. So if you had a particular one that you wanted to see, then we'd be interested to discuss that.
That's good to know. And I'm just a bit confused about how permanent this is. So you're talking about things that can be moved. So if we could had this installed at Gloucester Street, what would stay if we wanted, what's permanent and what moves?
So all of it can be moved. None of it is permanent. So the build-outs are designed so that they split into 3 sections, so they can be dismantled, picked up and put on a truck and used elsewhere. Again, there's the cycle corral at the moment. It is the 6 cycle stands are on a base. It's a lighter base than the ones that you've seen by Riverside, which is bolted to the surface, and then it has other elements for safety that are bolted to that. But again, they can all be picked up and moved and reused elsewhere.
Great, and so is there the possibility of it becoming permanent? So if people really like it and it works really well and achieves what we want it to achieve, can it stay there permanently?
Well, part of the Enliven Places programme is about trialling and testing, how spaces are used. And yes, if this actually slows traffic to be more aligned with the 30 k speed limit of this area. It may be that in future years, if Gloucester Street is redesigned, it may have permanent build-outs which slow traffic, or it could become more of a shared space, but that would be a future permanent project.
Okay. And just finally, how much of the $60,000 without the pūkeko would be if the hard infrastructure is moved? How much would have been spent on the space that then wouldn't be able to be used again?
So I think I've got in my report, it's more about the installation costs, which are a few thousand. We've got some contingency, and then obviously the safety audit costs of 6,000. So you could probably say around 10,000 of that is those costs, and we'd have a decommissioning cost as well, which we have budget for any of our projects when we decommission them or move them elsewhere.
So potentially we could spend 10,000 on
Sorry,
this.
and all that information is in the report.
Sorry,
We've got
I'm
lots
just
of questions to get
Thank
through.
you. Thanks,
Thank you.
Mr. Chair.
Tim?
Thank you. Have you talked with the Isaac Theatre Royal?
Yes.
And what were their feedback?
So
I'm asking a question though. Thank you.
So back in June, we gave all the stakeholders a letter around the area. We hand-delivered that, and I was called by the Isaac Theatre Royal, and we just had a chat. Their main concern was that the seating build-out would interrupt their access to their, the backstage theatre area, and it won't do that. So they were happy with what we were proposing, but that was just a verbal conversation we had.
Thank you.
I was along the same lines too. Were they not concerned with the seating right outside on the footpath that was going to impact the spill from the theatre?
The question was answered just before.
So right outside the Isaac Theatre at the moment, there is a sort of semi-permanent asphalted build-out. The proposed seating one is outside the cafe, which is on the corner of New Regent Street and Gloucester. So it's not outside the theatre at all.
Thank you.
The map's not quite right.
My question is around the seating as well. I was just wondering how you decided on the locations for it, because the one outside the Isaac Theatre Royal, for instance, is pretty much in shade all day, so I wouldn't want to sit there. So can you explain that?
Yes, well, we worked, transport, etc., about where were the best places to put these. There is a parking plan that was approved by the parking subcommittee back in April of this year, and therefore one of the aims was to ensure that we wouldn't result in a net loss of any parking. And the other thing is that yes, there are sunny spaces to sit, but also in the summer it's sometimes nice to have somewhere that's shaded as well. So we've got both a sunny place to sit and a shaded place.
Okay. I guess when it comes to the bike parks, I know there were 3 stands removed. You're planning on putting 6 stands back, which would hold 12 bikes. Is that right? That's good because the Theatre Royal have been asking for more bike stands.
They have, yes.
The ones that we've done for Riverside, if we were to use the same design as that, which is cheaper and much sturdier and things, they've actually only got 3 stands in the middle, haven't they? Even though they take up a full car parking space.
I haven't actually.
So they don't actually have 6.
They've got 3 stands in the middle, but you can actually use the ends as well.
Yeah, so you'd put 8. One on the inside. You wouldn't want to put them on the outside because they'd be on the road.
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, no, that's cool.
Yeah, my question is, have you considered putting the cycle stand, the corral thingy, in New Regent Street to leave that entrance, that car park thing out in front, or that lay-by thing out in front of the Theatre Royal? Because when the Theatre Royal is busy, it's very busy. And I would like to see the wooden thing not there, and maybe the cycle stands just round in New Regent Street a bit to leave that bit of road open. Had you given any of that any thought?
So, as I say, originally this was a Gloucester Street project. I know that the businesses in New Regent Street are looking for more cycle parking, and I believe that others within council are looking at some of the temporary ones that can be placed that people
The
have mentioned
riverside
before.
type ones.
The riverside
Yeah,
ones,
yeah.
yes. The other thing is the position of these cycle stands is what's on the parking plan that was approved by the parking subcommittee back in April.
Thank you.
So this is a transitional streetscape. Does that mean that, and we've heard that a lot of the build outs can be moved and repositioned around the city, does that mean that they're built for a life of 5 years and there wouldn't be much value after that of them, or we could potentially use all the build outs which make up most of the cost after the transitional project ended?
So we do ask for items to have a minimum of 5 years. Many of our assets, especially now that we're knowing that the rebuild is going to take longer and we'll have empty spaces for longer, that we hope that they have a 5 to 10 year lifespan. If you look at some of the items that we've got out, we call them the Ricky planters. They're the big seated planters out in the street. They've already been out there for 5 years and they've got plenty more of life in them because of the way that they've been constructed with a metal frame and a wooden exterior. Some of the early transitional projects that you may remember, such as the planters that were made out of tyres and recycled wood, they wouldn't last that time. So yes, we are looking at far more quality products now. No. We also have, if I might say, a gifting process now, so that when we no longer need items within the programme and we can't use them anymore, we are able to gift those on to either our partners, our placemaking partners, or other community organisations.
Sam?
Yeah, thank you. 2 questions. The first one is around, and I have to say this budget or staff delegated budget is sort of new to me, so I'm just wondering, there's 510,000 in it. This would be a large part of that. What would be left for the balance of the year?
So
if we proceeded with this $80,000 cost today, what would you have left until June next year?
450.
So you haven't spent anything else?
Oh, sorry. There's a whole programme of works that are underway. That projects have already started, and then there are others that are being planned. So we've already committed. You may have seen that we've done the recent competition for the summer street flags. So that project was about 30,000. So in beginning of January, the street flags will be up in the street, and they were part of a competition to get people to design those. So there's a whole raft of projects within the programme.
So yes, maybe I'm not being clear. What have we committed to already under staff delegation from this budget?
Current level is?
It's you'd probably say about 200,000 of that at least.
Okay, and the second one was, and I have to say the financial implications to me were quite light in terms of the reporting. But what will it have cost to put the report together in terms of staff time and these designs or these concepts? Do we know? Normally that is sort of factored in.
Yeah, so we haven't previously factored in staff time of report writing as a factor in the financial reporting. We've been reporting on our operational and capital budget.
So I guess when it comes though to options, we either proceed with it or do nothing. There's no financial implication for the time that's spent putting the report together.
So we've obviously invested some time in getting to this point already, which if there was a do nothing to take forward, that time would be a
do we know what
sunk
that's
cost.
quantified at? Because normally we do have that.
Yeah, with all due respect, I think staff did try to answer it. We don't quantify the staff time that goes in. If that's something that council want, we could look at that, but it's not easy to, across the 3 staff sitting there, and we don't do a time and motion type approach for individual council reports. That would cost in and of itself, but undoubtedly there's been a staff cost, and that's a sunk cost.
Even coming through community board though, we have, when you decline something, there's a cost of doing that, and that says the cost of the report was X amount.
We don't do that for council reports. I'm not familiar that we do that for community board ones, but there's a sunk cost, and the longer this goes on and the more report back, the greater that sunk cost is.
Yeah. Sam, I think you've raised a point, but I think it's not for this item. We need to take that offline. Jimmy?
I'm not sure this temporary project should be under the part of the annual plan. Am I right? Those budget should be under
Jimmy,
annual plan.
this is this financial year. There's always the
budget.
budget.
Financial,
so,
okay. If
yeah,
that's true, you particularly mentioned this project actually is in response to the community request. Also, regarding the consultation, you already have a consultation with Isaac Theatre already. So, but you here mentioned have further consultation. Who else? It's affected along whole kind of growth street, all those kind of stakeholders.
Right. So originally we sent out just a stakeholder letter back in June, and then recently, when this has been put back on the agenda, we have sent the same people. We've handed out a letter to them, and that's all the businesses along Gloucester Street and all the businesses up New Regent Street.
Okay. Okay. Thank you.
We've got 3 minutes left. Hopefully Andrew's going to be the last person to ask a question, and then we can put forward, is it going to actually add value to this discussion? Because we've gone around in circles, and I don't think we've actually progressed.
The question that I'd like to ask will...
No, we've got 20 minutes.
The question I'm about to ask probably would influence what I'd like to move, depending on the answer to the question, if I can. New Regent Street. The opportunity to put a cycle stand similar to the one or same as the one outside the Riverside Market on New Regent Street. If we passed a resolution now, today, approving that you do that, could you go ahead and do it, or would there be further steps that would need to occur first?
Mike just advised me that most of the land most of the road space down New Regent Street has been leased for table and chairs, and then obviously you've also got the tram corridor that runs through there as well, which needs a clear zone. So just off the top of my head, it might be difficult to find a location within there to site some.
So if we approved the cycle stand like the one that's outside Riverside Market to go in the same place where the cycle stand is shown in the report that's in front of us, you can do that without any further reference. You can just go ahead and do it.
Correct.
All right, great.
I'm going to jump in, and I'm going to move something, which I think is very similar to what you want. Could you put my... So the cycle stand that's going to be going in there will be the same cycle stand that is outside the Riverside Market? So this is to get, and it's going to be going exactly where the cycle stand is planned in the attachment A or C, which is. You can foreshadow a motion.
A motion, then, what do you look?
Yes. It's $8,000. It's already on budget. It's on budget. We've done it before.
It's the maintenance cost, right?
Okay. Is there any debate?
I want to approve as outlined in attachment C, minus the Pukeko, and with the inclusion of the Riverside-style cycle parks.
Through Mr. Chair, may I just ask that you also just, would you be able to, because I'd probably support that, if you can just say what the financial impact is in the resolution?
At a cost of 60,000.
Yeah.
He's happy to do that.
I just want clarity on that.
Need a seconder for that?
We can the mayor's already seconded my one. We can debate this one, and if it doesn't fail, then we can see if there's a seconder for. That's not a problem. So is there any debate, Yanni?
I just want to get clarity, because in the budget that we've got, there's things like installation costs, contingency, safety audit, including review post changes, which come up to more than the cost of putting the cycleway thing in. Can we just be really clear in the resolution? Because I think Jamie's point was really good, specifying how much we're approving in terms of the budget, so we're clear. So you've said 8,000. Is that's
okay? This is
point of order. I don't think that's
this
our delegation.
Yeah.
We've already delegated
Yeah.
the funding for this to staff to decide on the funding and given them the budget to do it.
I can't.
So we
I
don't
can't-
need to
Sorry,
approve it.
I'm just
Yanni, we're in debate. So it needs to be a debate, no questions.
All right. So how can this is like goes to the heart of transparency of this council. We don't even know how much we're approving in terms of number 2. I think number 2 is quite reasonable in terms of putting some cycle parking in, but we should be specific when we make resolutions so that our community can see with public money how much we're paying. And when you look at the budget that we've got for this project, and we've had an amendment come in that we've just seen now, no ability to get questions answered around having the total cost of it, but just like a figure that's chucked out of 8,000. I think it's really important we know what that 8,000 includes and what other costs we may be having. But I'm not going to support something that might have a safety audit that costs $6,000 and an installation of $1,500 and a contingency of $2,000. If that's greater than, the cost of putting in the cycleway, the cycle park, it just makes no sense at all. So I don't think it's fair that we can't get clarity around that, especially if we're being asked to vote on something. So I won't be supporting this. I think we do need to be transparent with how we're spending money, and this resolution does not do that.
Thank you. Andrew?
Yanni's comments kind of influence what I'm going to say, actually, because it would be good to know what the cost is, given those other additional costs that have just been referred to. In principle, I'm supportive of putting the cycle stand there. I think that's great. But in the absence of those other numbers, I'll be supporting paragraph 1 and be voting against paragraph 2.
Thank you. I'll be supporting the recommendation. I think that there needs to be a wee bit more work in this area because there are issues when it is busy. So I do think that it's been identified by the key parties in this area, Isaac Theatre Royal, etc., that a bike parking is as a need in this area. There is plenty of seating with regards to the area in the sun on New Regent Street. I think putting seating on the shady side of a Christchurch street is questionable, and I do think there's a wee bit more work needed to do here. So I will be supporting the recommendation put up by the Chairman. Cheers.
Thank you. No, I will not be supporting the recommendation. I request that you put them separately as well, because I think this Enliven Places project is really good, and I think it's going to make a huge difference to Gloucester Street if we would allow it to go forward. We do have money sunk into this already. We know that through design. Gloucester Street is a lovely street, and this will enable us to enjoy it even more. And I think with the plantings and the seating and the cycle stands there, I think it's going to really enhance this area. So I really implore you to support my foreshadowed motion if this fails, and let's liven up Gloucester Street.
Thank you. For me, one of the key things is getting the cycle parking back and getting a bit more of it. And we do already have money set aside in another budget that has been used to build the ones for Riverside Market. And that budget was approved by council in the previous term, and we asked staff to go and build those for us. So I think that using those Riverside ones that are already budgeted for, including the other costs, I think makes sense. We have been really transparent through our annual and long-term planning process. We have allocated this budget already to the Enliven Spaces program, and we delegated the decision-making over that to staff. If we want to change that in the middle of a meeting, then I don't think that's fair on the staff who have actually fulfilled their role exactly as we've asked them to. I'm happy to support the motion to get the cycle parking back. The budget's already there. Whenever we've got all of those things, the Riverside ones in or the similar ones into other places, all of that is already covered, and we have already allocated the budget for it. So I'd urge people to approve that. It looks like that there are potentially around the table people going to vote against this for two different reasons. Some because they potentially want more, and some because they don't want anything at all. And the risk is that those who want more end up with nothing, and the risk is that those who want nothing at all end up with everything. So what I do urge people to do is to vote for this one, which is a bit of a compromise. It gets something back, stuff that's already budgeted, and does it in a timely way to support both the new Regent Street businesses with the additional cycle parking, which currently gets all chained up 2 tables and chairs and lampposts and things down New Regent Street, and to support the Isaac Theatre Royal, which has been asking for bike parking back for quite some time now.
Point of order, Mr. Chair. I just wonder then if, just in light of what Sarah said, if perhaps Pauline's foreshadowed motion is actually an amendment, and it might make more sense to put that, and then you would then come back to
no,
your
it's
set of
not. It's the
recommendations.
opposite of what the motion is.
Even
because
even with number
yes,
with 2?
It's the opposite.
I thought 1's the opposite, 2 isn't.
Further to what Jamie's just saying, I want to support the original recommendation, number 1, but I want the cheaper bike stands, so there doesn't seem to be that option there. So how do we amend 1?
It would be if Pauline's was put an amendment.
Sorry.
Is that foreshadowed one?
Yeah.
Right, okay. I would like to support the foreshadowed, Pauline's foreshadowed.
Thanks. James?
Actually, Councillor Templeton described it well, actually, the everything or nothing aspect of it. And that makes it difficult with this two-part to it. But my question is, what happens to if one is passed, what happens to the temporary pedestrian amenity improvement project on Gloucester Street? What happens to it?
Question, but it won't happen
at all.
Yep. Leanne?
So look, I'm supporting, obviously since I seconded the recommendation that's been put up by the chair, and in a way I do so with regret because as Councillor Cotter has said, the staff have done precisely what they've been asked to do, and others have said that as well. So and I want to acknowledge the staff because that is exactly what was requested of them. I think, though, that what has happened since the time that this was considered by the Infrastructure and Transport Environment Committee is that we've had a change of focus with the new council. And we have asked that all aspects of the council's budgeting and what it's expending money on is actually revisited on a really in-depth basis so that we can understand whether we should be prioritising some things over other things. The Enliven Places program was established at a time where Gap Filler and all of those other community groups had basically transpired, and they had developed, they had emerged into an environment which encouraged the temporary activation. This is a large expenditure of money although temporary activation for a significant period of time, and I'm not necessarily persuaded that we need to be trying to achieve 2 objectives in the Enliven Places space. So I'd like to take some time to consider that. I do agree that we've got to get the temporary bike parking in there. I would recommend that people look at New Regent Street. I know that there are challenges with New Regent Street, but there are also potential opportunities closer to the corner of Gloucester Street with New Regent Street where they join. And the imagery doesn't quite stack with the picture of Gloucester Street and the location of the Theatre Royal. I worry about cars not being able to get out of that car park, which is a mobility park, and that space is a dropping off space immediately behind it. So they're constantly, cars are dropping off people. When it's really, really busy and it's all lined up with a red carpet, it's a really challenging area to be putting something like that in. So I'm supporting the Chair's recommendation. What I would have liked to have seen is something in between what Pauline suggested and what Mike has suggested, because I am not convinced about the seating, but I do think the crossing points are quite important. I cross across there a lot. I tend to jaywalk along there, but it's quite dangerous to be crossing because you've got to go between cars to come out most locations. So it's sort of, I think those crossing points should be something we should be considering. So I won't support this recommendation, even though I definitely want bike parking in.
There are likely to be significant additional costs than the 8,000 to implement 2. In which case I'm comfortable with 2.
Thank you. Can I ask a question of you, Mr. Chair? I don't mean to be a nuisance, but it's just around how this could potentially pass. How could you put one and two separately
I'll explain it in my debate.
if there's a foreshadowed motion?
I'll explain it in my debate. I think this is why we're going to have committees of the whole instead of recommendations coming up from, quite substantial committees, because it does get relitigated, which is a shame, and obviously staff have gone to a lot of work to get to this point. I don't think that's fair on staff, especially when it comes from a recommendation from a committee. But this is a new council. There's new faces on this council, and it's clear from what I've seen there's a new direction that we are heading, and we've heard from the ratepayers loud and clearly why that is. My recommendation is not to approve the proposed Enliven Places temporary pedestrian amenity area. So that basically means that project does not advance. The second part of that, and they will be put separately, is actually to install one of the temporary bike parking platforms that we have currently at Riverside Market. That is on budget. We've gone through that decision-making process last term, and they are ready to go close to it, so there's no extra cost to there. What I urge councillors to do is, if they actually want the project to go ahead, which we're debating, then say no to my recommendation. But if my one passes and it doesn't proceed, then say yes to the cycle parking if you want to see cycle parking there, because you have that opportunity to actually get something out of it, even if you don't get the whole project. Yeah, I'll be putting both mine, 1 and 2, and then we'll see what happens from that.
Thanks, Mike.
Would we still go to the foreshadowed?
Yeah.
Yes. Okay. Thank you.
Or you could do 1 and then 1 and then 2.
If needs be. We'll see what happens. Okay, I'm going to put, make sure we get it right. 1 does not approve the project. All those in favour? Aye. All those opposed? No. Okay, we'll get a division. Yeah. Yes for no.
Yes or no. Just to keep things really simple. So no for Pauline's.
So just so we're very clear, a yes is we do not approve this project. Okay.
Yes. Councillor McClellan?
Yes.
Councillor McDonald?
Yes.
Councillor Davidson?
Yes.
Councillor Galloway?
No.
Councillor Scandrett?
Yes.
Councillor Coker?
No.
Councillor Cotter?
No.
Councillor Chen?
Yes.
The Mayor?
Yes.
Councillor Templeton?
Yes.
Councillor Major?
Yes.
Councillor Turner?
Yes.
Councillor Johansson?
Yes.
Councillor Daniels?
No.
Councillor Goff?
No.
11 in favour and 5 against.
No,
It's-
you got no.
I was against.
Yeah.
No, you're.
All right, that's carried, 11.5. Yeah, and item 2, the temporary installation of the bike stand. All those in favour? Aye. Against? Carried. And Yanni abstained. And abstains. Right. That must be it.
Yep.
Okay, so we'll close the meeting with a karakia from Councillor Templeton.
Unohia ki te uru tapu nui o te tānei, kia wātea, kia mama, te nākau, te tinana, te wairua i te awa takata, koe rā o rongo whakairia ake ki runga, kia tina, homie, huie, tai ki e.
Right, then councillor meeting 1.